Good afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. Please note that we do have a quorum. Dr. Teft is not here, so I will chair until he arrives. And Jeff Heller just emailed and said he will not be here. And who else is missing? Melanie Smith. Okay. But we do have a quorum, so we can start. I'd like to begin with a moment of silence, please. Thank you, everyone. And now we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and I'd like to begin our evening's announcements by announcing that Dr. Teft is here, and we'll take over the chairmanship.
Sorry, I got here on time, but with the wrong stack of papers, so I had to go back and get them. Okay, so there we go. Right?
So we're on the announcements.
Yeah. So this is a time set aside for announcements from members of the GPAC. Are there any announcements, Glenn?
Just a couple of quick ones. During the second week in November, the National Estuary Program is going to hold a ceremony to mark the rainwater demonstration demo that we installed, Morro Bay and Bloom installed using an NEP grant at the Centennial Parkway bathroom. It's a nice setup, shows how rainwater harvesting works and is effective. And I hope that when I get a firm date, I can count on you all to come down and cheer us on. Two more quick things. Two groups I'm associated with, the Historical Society of Morro Bay and the Morro Bay Open Space Alliance, are going to have booths at the Harbor Festival this weekend, and it'll be fun for all to come down and say hello. Thanks.
Sure.
The Morro Bay Citizens Bike Committee will meet next Wednesday, October 5th, here in the community center in the community room across the lobby. Meet at 5 o'clock, and one of the main things that we will be discussing will be our list of unmet bike and pedestrian needs for 2017 that we will take to the council in January.
Just wanted to say I was lucky enough to go out on the water this morning and watch the San Salvador come in through the fog. It was really spectacular. She's here for 9 days. The Salinan tribe went out to greet her along with a huge flotilla of stand-up paddleboards and kayaks and the dragon boat and sailboats and motorboats, and cannons were going off. And those Thule boats did not sink. There were 3 of them, and it was a pretty wonderful, amazing event. There will be kids groups coming through all next week. This weekend should be really busy, and next weekend too, but I hope everybody gets a chance to see it. A little bit of history and pretty darn cool that it's here.
Great. Anything from this end of the table? A lot going on in Morro Bay. I just would add that Saturday, October 15th, will be Airport Day at the San Luis Obispo County Regional Airport. So anybody out there that likes planes and stuff like that, come by, and it's a nice event. Okay. No further announcements? Then we'll move on to presentations, and we have a gentleman by the name of Sean Green with us today, who is going to give us a brief presentation on lines of sight and Morro Bay unobstructed.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing if the tech is set up almost. I'm Sean Green, and residential and commercial property owner in the downtown area. I teach over at Cal Poly and am a writer, teacher, amateur city planner. I walk around the streets every day and just kind of take a peek at everything. I'm just a concerned citizen, and I thought I'd put together a little presentation. Super positive, I'll present some opportunities, and this seemed like the right environment to present it. So, thank you.
Is there the ability for Sean to hook his computer up to the? I saw that he brought his computer. His presentation's on there. Could he do that?
No, it's actually not possible on his computer.
It's a cable, a different cable.
Oh.
Okay.
Would a different jump drive help you out at all?
Jump drive is not.
You ever wish we had a bigger one?
No, because it'd be heavier. And I mostly use my computer.
A ballpoint pen.
I mean, I guess we could move forward to public comments and see if that
Yeah, we
gets
could.
through.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Well, yeah. Thank you, Scott. That's a great idea. So we'll just move the order a little bit, and while we're working on the technical issues, let's open the meeting up for public comment. This is open for anything on any subject. If you have something to say to us, please come forward. Okay. We have technical difficulties with that, too.
That was perfect. It worked. That was perfect.
So it looks like we're getting things rolling here. Perfect.
All right. Can you hear me if I'm out here? Okay. This is just a little PowerPoint presentation, including a lot of slides that I put together, as well as some things from, say, Google Street Views. It's called Waterfront Lines of Sight, Morro Bay Unobstructed. Basically, I participated in some of the GPAC workshops and community surveys, and obviously you guys have too, and done a great job with that. And public comments, and everyone pretty much says the same thing, that that the Bay is our number one asset. And so part of the reason I put this together is just to help kind of remind everyone that is our number one asset, and to do whatever we can to maintain that. Unfortunately, the Bay is sometimes a little bit hard to find. I think this might be a view corridor. I haven't necessarily looked at every single parcel on the map, so this isn't a code enforcement thing by any means. This is more of a philosophical approach to views and lines of sight of the Bay. This is a wonderful picture from Centennial Park that shows. This is actually from the top of Centennial Park, and it's food for thought. And I have it again later in the slideshow. That if you're standing at Centennial Park and you look out over the water, the only two places you can really see the water are directly in front of Centennial Park to the left of Libertine, and over the boatyard parcel that's only one story right now. And so that's how important that boatyard parcel is to remain at 15 feet if we ever hope to see the water from Centennial Park, which is part of the artist renderings that they put together from Michael Baker. They all look beautiful, beautiful views of the Bay, but they're contingent upon that building staying at that height. We have some more view corridors here. Amusement equipment, semi-transparent glass, private seating for restaurants, open or closed gates that aren't sliding gates but actually swung open and block about 12 feet of access. But when you can see the water, obviously we have beautiful views here in Morro Bay. This presentation is basically, like I mentioned, is going to cover lines of sight to the water and physical access to the water, primarily in the region between Main Street and the water, from Marina to Beach. You guys know the area well. I'm going to briefly talk about three what I would consider successes in the past. Obviously, we can't change things that are set in stone in the past. I mentioned three what you might call failures, or things that obstructed the views in some way, as well as three opportunities moving forward. some of which may provide for useful conversation amongst yourselves. Success number 1, open westbound streets. Okay, I think this is this is part of what gives an ocean town or a beach town or a waterfront town the feel of being a waterfront town. If you don't have westbound open streets at the end and you can't see the water, which is the case for about half of downtown, then I'm not sure what you have in terms of waterfront, a waterfront feel. Despite being 3 blocks away from the water on a map, if you can't see it, you don't feel like you're there. Some comparisons with open westbound streets, you might consider Shell Beach, or if you've been down to Manhattan Beach with some walk streets, those might be fair comparisons. I mentioned 4 streets up there, Marina, Pacific, Dunes, and Beach, which I would consider mostly open in a westbound direction. You can see the water. Although you think back when you're a kid and someone brings you to the beach, you see the ocean from 6 blocks away, 10 blocks away, and you feel like you're at the ocean. The other 50% of the streets in the downtown area, the westbound has been closed off in some way, either partially or completely, and you can't see it when you're moving westbound. Here's an example from out in the kayak of what an open westbound street looks like, and if we only have 4 left, we might as well do our best to keep those as open as possible. Success number 2, public piers and walkways. I put comparisons to Monterey and San Francisco just for comparison's sake. North Embarcadero, obviously mostly open, great views. South Embarcadero, also lots of access, great views. Central Embarcadero, has its moments. Nice new park that they had put in. This is a Google Street View, lower resolution, but still a very nice spot, open and public. Success number 3, water-friendly structures. You see photos up here of Rose's Landing. It has a nicely transparent second-floor roof deck. Though many people's preference would probably be to cap things at 1 story or 15 feet. If you are going to go a second-floor route purely based on revenue needs, that might be a decent way to go. The Boatyard parcel has a very wide central view corridor that, although there's some signage that blocks some of the view, it does a pretty decent job allowing foot and eye traffic to the water. This is a view from, this is up on Surf Street. Speaking of water-friendly structures, I mentioned North Embarcadero being possibly a better example for height and clearance issues. Harbor Hut, Great American Fish, Dockside, and some other 15-foot buildings allow for complete water, no obstructions on the views to the water from that area. Some failures. Obviously, I mentioned view corridors. If you were at the Centennial Park meeting on Tuesday, I mentioned that as well. It was a little bit more doom and gloom on Tuesday. Today's more cheery, talking about opportunities. Power boxes, trash collection, accidental landscaping, and by that I mean overgrown bushes that just no one takes care of. Intentional landscaping, which could be master leaseholders or maybe us as a city. Signage issues, screening, that includes opaque fences, it includes gates, it includes supposedly transparent screenings, narrow throughways. What else? We've got private, what appear to the public and at least to myself as private spaces, whether that was part of the original plan or not. These create view corridor obstructions and make it feel like you have to access these businesses or support these businesses to access the bay. And you see a vegetation, you see some dumpster areas. Certainly some of these things are necessary. They just may need to be more strategically placed. Failure number 2, heights and setbacks. 25-foot buildings block 100% of bay views from Centennial Park and the Bluff. Okay? I haven't heard that many people discussing this issue. Heights and setbacks are always an issue, but it seems very relevant and important to keep this in mind as we move forward with zoning and ordinances that will protect basically everywhere from the water to Main Street. Same photos. This is a simulation of what the waterfront would look like if the Boatyard built to 25 feet. Setbacks along the Embarcadero. basically, if we don't have significant setbacks on the second levels for the existing buildings or for new development plans, we create kind of a dungeon effect that by maybe 2 p.m., which is really the prime on a weekend day for people walking around in the warmth, we have a dungeon effect that casts a shadow all the way halfway through the Embarcadero street. Regarding setbacks, this is the garden on Pacific, a very small little thing, but an overhang like this removes significant lines of sight to the bay, and this isn't just for the resident next door, it's for everyone walking down Pacific or driving down Pacific. Similarly, this is, I think it's 456 Embarcadero Inn, was allowed to build to, I believe, 25, possibly 30 feet above the bluff line, and so basically all residents within 2 blocks of the Embarcadero can no longer see the water there. Failure number 3, I put coastal access. This may not seem significant, but if open passageways like this that are legal to pass through for foot traffic don't feel like they are, then people aren't going to walk on them and feel like they are welcome. This business in particular, I'm not sure exactly what the coding is for size of a coastal access sign, but it's very small there on the rail. If I had to throw out a number, 50 or 60% of people don't realize that they can walk there without having to look at a menu or consider going into that restaurant. So minimal signage for coastal access currently, sometimes minimal access. Another example is by the Giovanni's outdoor line. The way the line is organized, people are discouraged or sometimes even prevented from walking along the waterfront based on the direction of that line. And very small things like that make a big difference. Overall, it really seems like more of a philosophical problem of public-private balance, or how much do we want to tell people that we can walk behind those buildings, okay, as a city, but still maintaining our positive relationship with businesses. There's another coastal access sign. We all know the Anderson Inn here, and then those parking spaces, I think that's where coastal access is, between there. Not sure. There's another coastal access sign by a fishing area, and I understand that the fishing industry, it might be tough to have the general public walking around their equipment. It might just be a decision of whether we allow coastal access in that spot, but signage should be probably a little bit more increased if we do want to allow people through there. Opportunities. Okay, this is where we head in the right direction, knowing all this information. One, I put create and enforce wider view corridors and increase coastal access requirements west of Embarcadero. This is more of a philosophical thing, so if people don't feel this way, then that's fine. But if people do want these things and claim that the bay is our #1 asset, I think this is something to consider. Opportunity number 2, create and enforce lower maximum heights and increase setbacks from Main Street to the waterfront and between Marina and Beach. Again, this is for the same reasons, to preserve our foot and eye access to the water. And lastly, I put to encourage the general plan consultant to give the city the cold hard truth, even if it hurts sometimes, regarding some of these items. The artist renderings that they put together are amazing, and I mean, when I saw the Centennial Park stuff, I mean, sure, there's little tweaks here and there that people want to make, but I think for the most part, it's a huge step in the right direction. But I think it's also important for us as a city, even though we are kind of dictating the direction of the consultant, I think it's important for us to hear what's not working so that we avoid future mistakes. And that's just kind of my take. I'd kind of rather be told something is set in stone and a lost cause. Okay, now we can move forward knowing that. Or here's some opportunities that you absolutely cannot let go. Right. Just so one last little simulation. Here's the boatyard parcel from Centennial Park, and that's at 2 stories or 25 feet. And that's all I have. Thank you. I guess I can field any questions. I just put this together, walking around town.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's a question for you or maybe a question for the request to the consultants, but the whole trade-off that between economic development and business-friendly rules, some of the things we talked about last time, and restrictions and on building and particularly in the business area district where you're trying to get more more development. I would personally like to get some help or some guidance on how to make those trade-offs, or what are some of the things that we can do when we get down to those really hard choices. I think we have actually more visual access to the water because we have more rock. And sometimes if you see the rock but you don't see the water, it still gives you that feel. In Santa Barbara, you have the land is mostly flat, so almost nobody gets an ocean view. Whereas here we have hills, and so a lot of people, even far from the water, can have good views. You don't have to go, in Santa Barbara, you have to get up in the hills where the really rich people live, but you don't really have to do that here. So I think we're very fortunate in our topography. But I would like to see, a lot of the stuff we look at is mom and apple pie. Yes, we want business-friendly rules. Yes, we want line of sight. We want access. Certainly no excuse to not labeling access that we have. But I would like some help in making those trade-offs. If you have anything you want to say about that, I think that would be great. But my request to the consultants is, when we get down to that, is we're going to need some help, I think, in that area.
I think that's a great point, and I'm probably more business-friendly than anybody, and I really believe in. I mean, we have so many things that we need to do here in the city. I think the focus, the fact that that the Bay is our number one asset, and it has been proven time and again through community outreach that many things are, we're able to compromise on many things, but access to the Bay might not be one of those. So I think I have the same questions.
Any other questions, comments? Just a couple of comments just things that that may encourage you, actually. In terms of some of the view corridors that you showed, I think some of those are probably not actually view corridors, because the Waterfront Master Plan prohibits any object higher than 30 inches in a view corridor.
30 feet?
Pardon?
30 inches.
30 inches.
30 inches.
Yeah. So I think some of those things may be more informal view corridors. Second thing is, in terms of setbacks, again, some of the buildings I think that you're looking at are older buildings, may antedate the Waterfront Master Plan. Waterfront Master Plan does require a 10-foot setback for second stories on the west side of the Embarcadero, and some of the buildings I think that you were looking at don't have that. And then in terms of the access, we're really, the Planning Commission is very aware of that. We've actually recently passed a couple of resolutions to clarify the issues with regard to lateral access, clarifying the fact that new development does have to have continuous lateral access across the entire bayfront side. Again, many of the older buildings haven't had that. And also clarifying what the requirements are for view corridors. So we're kind of going down the same road here.
Yeah, it seems like we're all on the same page. It's just kind of, I think we're all on the same page.
Yeah, Glenn.
Yeah, I would think we have to recognize, I think we're heading down the right path. I agree with some of the things you're saying. I would support more signage, bigger signage, so that people can identify that they can use those areas. There are some impediments. For example, now at Rose's, there's a corridor there that obviously looks like it's part of the restaurant, because they've now brought tables right back into the walkway. They had moved them, now they're back. So that's an impediment. So I think we need to stay up on that with our code enforcement to make sure those things keep open, but bigger signage. But the thing that comes to mind is that I believe as we go through and redevelop these properties, and they were going to ask for long-term leases, the amount they have to spend today to redevelop these properties is significantly higher than what they had to do before, which is dictating, because my previous career was as a builder, is dictating that they utilize that second floor space to get that, to make it pencil out for them to rebuild. It's just a matter of economics. So we're going to have to decide, do we want aesthetic looking views, or do we need the economic incentive of getting that money in to replace the tax base that we lost with Dynergy, for example?
Thank you very much. Okay, interesting. So we'll move on to our consent calendar. We have only one item on the consent calendar today, which is A1, the revised Community Vulnerability and Resiliency Assessment, CBRA draft. And I will ask if there's any discussion on this item. Yeah.
I would ask that the GPAC consider not approving this today because we haven't had a chance to really look at the revisions. In fact, until yesterday, there was a minor faux pas as far as having the correct document up on the website with the red line. So I just don't feel comfortable approving this document, just the same as we did last week as far as the vision of the other one that we pulled. I think it's premature to be approving of this consent calendar. I know it says receive and file, but I don't think we've approved it yet.
Any other thoughts?
I sort of go back and forth on that because I almost feel like it's a trust issue. I mean, they took a lot of careful notes during all of our conversations about things. We can assume they got it pretty right as scientific data, background analysis stuff. So my concern would be we need to keep moving forward with the process, and I don't feel like there's any major flaws in what was presented, but you know, I guess I'd be willing to go either way with it, but I just don't want to see us stalled.
And I understand that need, and I understand that there's a timetable, but I have to disagree that there aren't major flaws. And it stems again from the kind of the way this is not kind of, it's not growing one phase into another. We're trying to kind of do all the phases at the same time. And one of the major issues that I had with the baseline assessment was the fact that many of the statistics that are quoted in there, and particularly in the economic section, are wrong. They're just incorrect. They're factually incorrect. And they lead to conclusions that I think take us in the wrong direction. Okay? I mean, I can just as a very small example, one of the conclusions is that we have lower salaries because we have an unusually high number of people working in the food service and accommodations industry. That is not true. The proportion of Morro Bay residents working in food service and accommodation is exactly the same as the state, as the state's proportion. So I really, I mean, I hate to be a stickler, but I do think accuracy is important. And what we don't have now in this whole process going forward is accuracy. And one of the main criticisms that I submitted 2 months ago was go back, look at this data critically, go back to the original sources, make sure what we're quoting, make sure that, there are places where we're comparing apples and oranges. They're saying in 2000, the U.S. Census showed this population, and in 2015, the Department of Finance's projection was this, and we compare the two and we get a growth rate. You can't do that. You've got to compare like with like, okay? And there's just many places that that's not done. And as a result, conclusions are wrong. The conclusion that the population of Morro Bay is growing twice as fast as the state of California, totally wrong. The conclusion that household income has increased by 5% in the last 5 years, 100% wrong. Those kind of things have got to be, I think, taken care of. So I would support doing the same thing with this, that we're going to do with the CBA, which is to have another go at it, go through it again and make sure that we have it right.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor this item, but like Dr. Teff said, once we submit comments and we ask for changes and we identify inaccuracies, then it would seem like the GPAC, we should be able to get that back and discuss it as a group to be able to see if, as it's read with the revisions, it makes sense and it speaks to what our vision is as GPAC, because we're representing the residents of Morro Bay. I realize that will take a longer time, and so be it. Just to remind the audience that we didn't start till September of last year, where we lost basically most of last year. So we're behind the 8 ball on time. So to do this correctly, I think is a decision on GPAC's part. Do we want to do this correctly for the best interest of our citizens, or do we want to rush through this? My vote is to not rush through it. My vote is to take our time, make sure it's entirely accurate, and it also, the language is user-friendly, and that people can read this thing after we're done and say, this makes sense, I can understand it, and I know what I need to do when I go in to do a project in Morro Bay.
Yeah. Well, let's hear from other people. Let's hear from the rest of the commission what we think. Red, I'm going to put you on the spot.
I'm going to agree with you, Dr. Tefton. We need to take more time and be sure that this is accurate. What we're doing is too important to be based on a foundation of inaccurate information.
Well, it seems to me that after 20 odd years, if it took us another couple of months to get through it in the right way, that would make some sense.
So we've got 2 different reports we're talking about, right? You've got the baseline assessment and then the community vulnerability and resiliency report.
Right, and the problem is that the information from the CBA is brought forward, that formed the basis for the CBRA. So then if that information comes forward, and again, it's not the entire document. There's certain areas I think are very well done. I think the climate change section is extremely well done. It's just, some of these places where we have data that doesn't make sense. I think it impacts our credibility if we go, this is what we're accepting, and then other people look at it and go, really?
So I know, Dr. Teft, you actually, I saw you had pages and pages of your own analysis and statistics, and that I'm assuming went to Michael Baker. Did you email that to them? Okay, and have you guys looked at that and reviewed it and compensated, made the adjustments?
The adjustments on the economic side, because we're taken predominantly from a separate effort that was done through Jabin Concepts. Okay. We're in a little bit of a holding pattern on working that, because it was the responsibility of the office of the deputy city manager, and we don't have one right now. They'll be coming on board here pretty quickly, but we have a little bit of a gap there where getting some of the change done is maybe not as straightforward as it might otherwise be.
But we're not required to use the data from Chapin Concepts, are we? There's nothing that says this is the information you have to use.
It's not necessarily the information that you have to use, but it is information the city was paying for, and so so the intent was to leverage that process and those documents.
Just not to replicate.
And not to redo it, or to pay for it twice, and then have competing documents, and then sit down and try to figure out what the scoop was between it. The idea was, again, we had that information available to us, and would have been able to work through it a little more quickly, just have a little bit of an issue with where we're at with it at this point. And have to sit down in a group on the other side of the table with the folks that have been dealing with this. I've dealt with it a little bit, but only keeping that process afloat while we wait for the new deputy city manager to come on board.
May I ask, Dr. Teft, is it primarily, you said the economic analysis is where most of it is. And you submitted those comments?
I've submitted some comments. I've actually continued working on this in all my spare time.
I noticed you have a lot.
And have gone through and looked at some of the other tables as well. And there's real problem. I mean, and the problem is, and I hate to belabor it, the problem is it leads to erroneous conclusions. You know, one of the sort of themes that I've heard going around is, well, the reason that we don't have affordable housing in Morro Bay is that just the salaries are too low, you know, when you look at it in depth, you realize that actually Morro Bay is doing better than the rest of the state in terms of salaries are down everywhere. They haven't risen 5%. When you take inflation into account, they've actually decreased statewide every year since 2009. Median household income has decreased. The only reason it looked like it went up is Chapin didn't look at inflation. They're measuring 2009 dollars against 2015 dollars. You can't do that. But the reality is that Morro Bay is not behind the 8 ball really in terms of personal income. The main reason that household income looks lower in Morro Bay than the rest of the state is that we have smaller households. If you look at per capita household income, we're on a par with the rest of the state. So if you go forward saying the way that we're going to get affordable housing is to get better jobs in Morro Bay, it's not going to work.
What I was trying to get to is to see if there's a way to get this process streamlined a little bit. If your comments can be put online so we can focus on where you see the problems instead of trying to have somebody redo the whole document, so that we can then respond that way and use our email or some other mechanism to get comments back to Jeff so that they can reorganize those pieces and then move forward on that, because it's a huge thing to go back and redo all of this work.
Everything that I've submitted to Scott and to MBI is online currently.
We were able to get it all up, I think, last week.
Okay.
Where is it?
So if you, just give me 1 second here. If you go to the Plan Morro Bay page, it's under the additional project documents link towards the bottom.
Okay.
We have all the current working documents at the top of the page, so you find those, and that's where the red line, and that's what Rich was talking about. We had an issue. We had linked the same revised document twice, and it's called one of the red line. It wasn't the red line one. It was just they linked the wrong document, so we fixed that, and now that's up there, so you can see the red line changes that Michael Baker's made, and so forth. But it's the towards the lower part, there's the project documents that'll have all the older versions of the various documents, CBA, CBRA, those types of things. The previous versions will be on there, and so will commentary from all of the GPAC members. I'm posting all of your comments there, so you can all see what the others are talking about and what their issues are. So, so you understand what's going on. Right. So you're all, you don't have to have all those same conversations here. You can see what.
I think that's a good solution, and we can all contribute to that. And maybe by the next time we meet, we will have gone through that process so that we can then quickly adopt this report and be done.
And just for clarification purposes, I recall from our last meeting that we brought forward the CBA for a similar receive and file type treatment, and it was the will of the GPAC at that point to say let's table further discussion on the CBA to a future agenda item. Yeah. And that allows you the opportunity then to consider the report that we've provided with revisions, consider the red line to that report, consider each other's submitted comments, which are all there. So I guess for preparation for that future agenda, I'd encourage that activity, and we're prepared to do the same with the CVRA.
I understand. I think that maybe we didn't all know that those things were there. I just discovered all these Dr. Teff comments a couple of days ago. So I now know they exist, but I didn't know that ahead of time. So it's a matter of us being on.
And the circumstance that Scott refers to with the economic chapter is a unique situation.
Yeah, right.
And so, to the degree possible, I would encourage us in the shorter term to focus all our efforts in the other locations, allow the city to appoint the new deputy city manager and move that economic development process forward, which will then be the vehicle for revising the economic statistics.
Have the comments gone to Chabon Concepts about the statistical inaccuracies? And I mean, they should make good.
They should, and I think that's going to be our intent. Have we sent them over to this point? Not yet. I'm waiting. Been trying to get the ear of the city manager to talk to them a little bit about the issue that we're having. Haven't had the opportunity is all. Going back one, I have a question for you because I assumed this was happening, and it sounds like maybe it wasn't from Glenn's comments. We have these pages on the website tied to Notify Me, and all your names are in there. And so when we're updating the pages, the Notify Me emails are supposed to be sending out. It sounds like it's not happening, so something's wrong there. Okay, thank you for that. That's good information. I thought it was happening automatically, and obviously that's not. So we're going to fix that for you. So you do, whenever we update it, either page, then you'll get notified. I mean, it's more emails for you, but at least you know that somebody put something in there and you can take a look. So
it kind of feels like we're sort of, we've been a little bit, and I don't mind doing it because, if you know how to navigate a web page, it's not bad. But it feels like we've sort of left to our own to kind of find things in various places, and it is a little more time consuming than it probably needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, we created from the beginning the we created from the beginning the Plan Mora Bay page. That's always had data on it related to what we were doing.
Yeah.
We've reorganized it though because it was a little clunky to use, and so it's a little better now with, again, how we put the documents that you're currently working on up on front and then put the other documents below. And there's a description that talks and says that at the top of the page. So when you read it, you're like, okay, these are the ones that we're working on, and the rest of them can be found below. So it does give you some of that. That was not there, so I do agree with that.
So I still think we're missing a step. And before I get to that, can I request that as far as GPAC, I understand, and if the Notify Me is working, that's good. But when there is, like what you just referenced, Scott, a significant reorganization of the document, I would ask that your staff would notify GPAC as an entirety and let us know the changes have been made. Please review that instead of.
Like I said, I thought that was
okay.
Being pushed out automatically, but obviously not. So.
I'm asking something besides Notify Me. I'm asking the staff to send us an email and say, hey guys, this has been changed and revised. Please take a look at the new structure or whatever, like what you were just talking about.
That's fine.
Some way to let us know. Secondly, the step I'm talking about is, okay, we're going to pull it again, it sounds like. We're going to pull this again. Now you're going to have two documents pulled. What I was trying to get at earlier is, why aren't we I know it's time consuming, but it may smoothen out as we work through this. But if we submit comments and then their input, and we're notified that we have the comments input, then we get a chance to review it, and then we can move forward. But there's not like both times it's just been receive and file. I think we need a step in between that says discuss the revised CVA or the one that we're looking at today, and then we can make an intelligent decision on it. But right now, we don't. I think we're expected to maybe look at this at home, do our homework, and then on a Brown Act committee, it would seem like we need to discuss this in an open public situation and discuss that input and say, yes, I agree with that. No, I don't agree with that. And then put it on the next agenda for consent, and then it would be a proper consent item, the way I see it.
I would only remind you that you're not approving anything. This is a process and will continue to be a process as we move down the road. Michael Baker has been very clear with you on the fact that these background documents are going to be updated continuously over time as new information comes forward, as we pull new information into the document, into the policies that are created. It's likely that things are added over time. So again, General Plan Advisory Committee, you're not approving these documents. This is the approved document. That's not how it works. City Council will be authorizing all of those things, but you'll be making sort of recommendations, those kinds of things. They're living documents. So we're not going to redo them every time we add, things are going to be added to them over time, potentially.
I don't think there's nothing wrong with that. I think it just would be good to get some notice. I feel like or am I supposed to check it every day just to see if anything's changed or what? I mean, it would just be good to get some kind of notification if something's updated. I would understand they're living documents and it's a long process and things will change over that time. But it would be good to get some notice when things are changed, and we can take a look and see if there's any issue. We would have the opportunity to bring it up. But I understand we're not approving things, but it would be at least good to get notice when things are revised.
Absolutely. No, I agree with that.
I would just mention that I have been getting the notify me messages. However, I signed up on the website, so maybe that process will activate it if people are having trouble with it.
I literally thought that I had administrative staff sign you all up so you were getting them. So because you all get the notifications due for the agenda, right?
Yes.
And we signed you up for that, and I thought we signed you up for these other things.
I don't.
You did.
I don't get the agendas. No, I get an email from Cindy or Gina to let me know about the meeting, and attached is the agenda.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Actually, when I said we get the agendas, that's what I've been getting too.
Just straight emails. Okay.
Just straight emails.
Okay.
So maybe a better way for me saying what I was trying to get across is at least get a consensus from GPAC that we all agree that the information input that we put in was input and that it's all correct now up to best of what we understand, and that we can move forward.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're not approving anything. I mean, eventually the city council is going to do that. That's way above our pay grade. But on the other hand, we're kind of putting our names on it. You know what I'm saying? We're kind of saying this has been through our process, and so it's kind of it would be good if we were comfortable with what we were passing forward.
If we absolutely get the fact that you're not. That's crystal clear to us. So, I mean, we're going to work through that. That's fine. I mean, I totally appreciate that. We're not missing that. So we're going to work to improve that for you.
Okay, we have no unfinished business, so we will proceed with our new business, which is continuing to work with the draft key issues and policies report. We've been working with for a couple of meetings, and so I'll turn it over to Scott to introduce Jeff and the staff from.
Just so we can hop in, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
All right, thank you,
Off we go.
Scott. Good evening, Jeff Henderson with Michael Baker International. With me this evening are Amy Sinsheimer and Lorelei Capel. We have a presentation this evening. We've already addressed the receive and file, and maybe just for clarity's sake, let me confirm it. Is it the will of the GPAC to defer further discussion of the CVRA to a future agenda item?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank
And
you.
I would I would have no objection to bringing the CBA and the CVRA back together because I think we have a lot of the same. I mean, I think when we fix one, we'll be fixing the other.
Perfect. Yeah, good.
Great.
So we will do that. We'll put that on our list of items for future agenda. We've had Sean's presentation this evening on the westbound lines of sight. And so our two remaining items this evening are to continue our discussion of the key issues and policies and press forward as far as we can get into that discussion tonight. I think we're going to try to, Chair Teft, I think my recommendation might be that we try to do that through to about 6:30, at which point we can pause and take the item for the downtown waterfront strategic plan. That's an important item for us this evening to have everybody prepared for the upcoming workshop on October the 12th. So, with no further ado, a few status updates on the project itself. We are continuing to engage in community engagement and outreach, continuing to, hopefully you're able to use the materials that were provided to you to collect further input on the key issues and policies that we're continuing to discuss. On the key issues and policies themselves, this body's continuing our discussion on those issues and policies. And as you're providing us input on the ones that we have addressed, we're beginning the process of summarizing that input, and then we'll begin working with staff on what recommendations would go forward to the Planning Commission and City Council on each of these items for the next phase of that process. And then the Downtown Waterfront Strategic Plan is also proceeding. We're in the process now of finalizing our understanding and documentation of existing conditions and reviewing that material with staff. And Lorelei will assist us in presenting a few slides later in the presentation on our upcoming workshop on October the 12th, the second community workshop. This particular workshop is dedicated solely to the Downtown Waterfront Strategic Plan in the interest of getting further guidance on that so that that project can progress toward its deadline at the end of this year. We talked about the CVRA already, so I'll move us back into the key issues, and just for everyone's benefit, a reminder that these are addressing a range of different topics. Some of them are required by general plan law, some by the Coastal Act, some are identified just as important community topics identified through our outreach to date. And our attempt here is to isolate the potentially most controversial items. There's a number of things that state law just requires us to do, or the Coastal Act simply requires us to do, and we don't anticipate that there'll be a lot of controversy around them. Those items will be addressed in a draft general plan that will be provided to you for further discussion. What we're really emphasizing here are what I might call more informally the hot button issues, the things that, as Committee Member Schneider mentioned, are the places where there are trade-offs. These are the things where we're trying to have those discussions early, anticipate those trade-offs so that we can really work through them as we're putting the plan together. And we're essentially attempting to consider, discuss, and provide very preliminary recommendations, again, subject to things may change as we go forward through the process, as we attempt to iron out those trade-offs and potential inconsistencies. And the process, I'll get to you in just a moment, the process starts with the GPAC. And again, the point is that the discussions that we have here, the input that you provide will help us to further refine these potential policy approaches with staff and ultimately with the Planning Commission and City Council to influence both the direction of the land use plan and the alternatives that we bring forward, and ultimately the draft general plan. Okay, any questions or clarifications before we begin?
Jeff, just to clarify, did you say, you said there are items that are dictated by state, which I'm aware of. So the ones that we're looking at are the ones that are not dictated by state, or is it a combination?
This is a combination.
Will we be looking at a way to identify so that all of us can look easily at the parts in these documents that say required by state, or by some sort of easy way to do it?
Absolutely. And for example, the ones that are required by the Coastal Act have got this, essentially this coastal icon that's up on the slide. So all of those, for example, are specific provisions of the Coastal Act that we need to address in the general plan and local coastal program.
And the reason why I bring that up too, I've had a couple of different citizens ask me about that. Why are you doing such and such? And I said, well, there are certain parts that are required by state. And so, I mean, I don't want to pass the buck, but it is out of our hands. So we need to make it clear online that people can look at that and say, oh, well, this is what it is. Thank you.
Point well taken. Okay, we are on item number 8 in the memorandum that's been provided to you on the key issues. And I'm going to maybe spend a little less time setting up each of these in the interest of maximizing the time for GPAC discussion. But this is the issue that's dedicated to lower cost overnight visitor accommodations policy. And it's a lot of sort of words run together. But what this really gets at is a Coastal Act provision that requires the city, as part of providing access to the coast for residents throughout California, to ensure that there are a range of options available for overnight accommodations that fit lower and medium level cost, so that it's not just, you don't have communities that emphasize just high level cost accommodations, and by way of doing that would restrict access to the coast for lower or moderate income people. And so that's a provision of the Coastal Act that the Commission itself is actually very actively working with communities about right now. It's a hot button issue for the Coastal Commission, and as a result, a hot button issue for our local coastal program.
Jeff, can you explain item 8B? Aren't we talking about short-term rentals, or am I misunderstanding what?
Short-term rentals is wrapped into the overnight visitor accommodations
Right.
policy, and that's largely because the Coastal Commission has identified short-term rentals as a potential means.
Right, but this says prohibit or regulate them, but why would you encourage them if you wanted more low-cost accommodations? I mean, I'm not understanding the verbiage.
Right, that's the provision of the, okay, let me back up just one step. The way these are presented on the slide are presented in the way that they're presented in the memorandum as proposed recommendations. So yes, the recommendation at this point is to choose either to prohibit or to regulate short-term rentals.
Oh, okay, okay, all right. So that's
Sorry,
actually
it's
meant
either
to
or.
promote short-term rentals
Right.
by prohibiting or regulating them? I'm not sure I'm getting...
If the intent is to, well, and I would say in this instance, if the intent is to promote short-term rentals,
Well-
what the commission encourages you to do is establish a process under which you regulate them. You can control them, you can ensure
Okay.
you're collecting, for example, TOT tax from them, that kind of thing, so that you have an established process to regulate them as opposed to just kind of letting it roll.
Okay, and let me make sure I understand. When we talk about short-term rentals, are we talking about hotel rooms? Are we talking about Airbnb? What are we...
The most commonly referred to options for this under this particular topic are Airbnb and VRBO.
Okay, so their position is if you don't regulate them, you shouldn't have them at all?
Their position is a number of jurisdictions throughout California have taken the approach of outright prohibition.
And they're
of
okay with
these
that?
in residential zones. They are in opposition to that.
Okay, well then why do they want you to prohibit or... I guess I apologize if I'm being dense here.
That's okay. I've laid this out as what we have in front of us is a choice. Prohibit or don't prohibit but regulate.
Well, that's taking into consideration the city's implemented, just for short-term vacation rentals, a moratorium and placed a cap on them. So that's one of the questions that comes out is what does the city want to do? I'll be quite frank. I had a conversation with coastal staff today about this in relationship to the city's secondary unit ordinance, which prohibits secondary units from, being vacation rentals. The Coastal Commission was not in favor of that, and they said, "Hey, we'd like to strip that out of there." And we said, "Hey, but the primary residence can be used as a vacation rental. In fact, we've gotten applications for that in." They said, "Oh, really?" And I thought, yeah. In the time frame that we've been put the moratorium in place, that's happened a couple of different times. I said, in the end, we're going to do what we're doing here and what Jeff's talking about, and that's creating the policy moving forward. So that, I think the likely outcome in the direction that sort of council was giving when we went through the moratorium process was to go figure out what the regulation should be.
Okay, because it seems to me that there is a trade-off between affordable accommodations and affordable housing almost, because when you use units, I know it's been more of a conflict, say, in San Francisco and other places, but if you take these units and people are almost having these sort of Airbnb hotels kind of thing, but that takes some of the, what would be otherwise residential housing off the market, and if you're, again, this is a conflict potentially between affordable housing and affordable accommodations, we're going to need some help with that. I'm not sure, we're taking these one at a time, but I think some of them are in conflict with each other.
Jeff, just let me see if I can clarify.
Sure.
What you have up there are two options that the Coastal Commission might consider. One is prohibition, and the other one is if you decide to have it, then you can regulate it.
And the way it's summarized there, what's shown there as 8B is a summary of what in the report is written as establish and implement a policy to either prohibit or regulate short-term rentals within the coastal zone.
Thank you. And I think I would argue that we should regulate them and permit them, for starters.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one other piece of context I would provide for this is in some discussions with coastal staff and other jurisdictions we've worked in on this issue, they come around to, the objective here is not to take a hard and firm stand on short-term rentals. The objective is to ensure that the jurisdiction provides a wide range of options at affordable levels. So to the degree that you're doing that in other means, you have more flexibility to take a stand one way or the other in a firm sense on short-term rentals.
So that
if you're not really relying on short-term rentals as a way of improving your affordability.
That was a question I had. Do they quantify a percentage of your available vacation properties? Because we have quite a lot, in addition to hotels, motels, bed and breakfasts, and the VRBOs and so on. We have campgrounds and we have mobile home, what do you call them? The RV parks.
Right.
So, is there a percentage? What's the dollar figure they're looking at that is considered low income? And if we have enough in terms of RV parks and campgrounds and so on, I mean, I hear from most of the public that I talk to, my neighbors, they're not happy with vacation rentals in the neighborhood. And that's something I think that's been expressed at city council meetings over and over. And so, if we compensate for that by saying, yeah, but look, we have X number of spaces in the RV parks and in the campgrounds, have they quantified that?
That is what they encourage us to do on the local
Yeah,
level.
but it's important to
different for
know.
every jurisdiction.
It's important to know: do we have enough now, and we simply have to maintain it and make sure that doesn't deteriorate? If something goes away, something else comes in, or do we not have enough now, and we're sort of in some kind of deficit situation where we have to go and have more?
Right.
It's important to know that.
Our assessment, and I might refer to Scott just on some verification of any discussions on this with Coastal to date, but our assessment at this point shows that Morro Bay does a great job of providing a range of affordable uses. And that's why I'm sort of suggesting, and this is all subject to being worked out with Coastal Commission staff. This is in some ways a negotiation. But the city is in a position of strength from the sense of providing a range of affordable options: campgrounds, RV parks, affordable hotels. There are a whole range here that a lot of jurisdictions don't have. And that's for that reason, this could be less of a lightning rod issue with Coastal here than it is in other places.
One of the things I see, though, for example, is with sea level rise, one of the issues is it wiping out our campgrounds,
Right.
for example, or RV parks that are in that lower floodplain. So that's, as we get to planning, in whatever spaces are left, I mean, to me, that's one of the things this document needs to provide for.
That is correct.
And I think that's been set up rather nicely.
And the other thing, I have neighbors like Susan's who are very concerned about vacation rentals. And the issue really gets down to the density, I think. If you have 3 or 4 on one block, they're all together, there can be a lot of parking, there can be noise. So I think right now we have a hard cap of 250 citywide. But looking at that with a density criterion, and maybe a different one for a room in a house than a full house, might be a good way to begin to approach it. And I think we should start doing it simply because of the neighborhood qualities.
That's one of the major complaints. You're correct. I mean, what you're hearing, I'm hearing regularly, across neighborhoods in Morro Bay is some folks end up with 3 and 4 of them on their street. Well, if you're in the beach tract and you only have 10 houses on your street and you have 4 vacation rentals there, what's your neighborhood like? It's probably a lot less residential than say some of the other ones that don't have vacation rentals on them.
I think it's different too when you have the owner on site and they're just renting out rooms in their house. There's at least I feel like there's just some measure of control there. Whereas if you have absentee owners who are just renting things out, I think that's a different situation.
I think that as we move forward, though, we're going to need to look at this in a more nuanced way, because you're right. I mean, in residential neighborhoods, there can be quite a bit of they can be quite intrusive. They can disrupt the neighborhood. However, there may be other parts of town, and I'm thinking of second stories in the downtown, where they may be perfect. In other words, that may bring life, some life to the downtown in the evening, as well as augment the income of the property owner. So, I think we have to look at where do we want to restrict, and where do we want to encourage. I think it's. It may not be the same answer in all neighborhoods.
Does that get back to our zoning redo?
Eventually,
Yeah.
yes.
Eventually.
But it starts with setting the policy.
Right.
Yeah.
So Jeff, I recall, and I mentioned to Scott about this meeting, council was, in my opinion, very clear when we did the moratorium that they want us to regulate. They did not use the word prohibit. So I would ask that would be stricken from this to regulate. And then secondly, I'd like to back up, if I could, from this bullet point to the very beginning of your document, where it speaks to the 42 overnight accommodations, 63% are below the threshold of $118.07. So do we need to also be looking at, we talked earlier, and we're going to have this presentation about the Embarcadero economic deal. As we allow, if council moves forward with what seems to be their direction as far as adding motel units above some of the commercial downstairs, we know that the cost of those are going to be significantly higher than this low income, which to me begs the need to put that in the equation as far as deciding where we go with vacation rentals, because they're going to become, as well as campgrounds, B&B and such, an integral part of maintaining that threshold. So again, my other question is that we only, you talked about you only considered in those 42 overnight accommodations, hotels, motels, inns, bed and breakfasts, campgrounds, RV parks, etc. I guess I would question, why are we not considering VRB on Airbnb? Because the only difference between a B&B and an Airbnb or a VRBO is they don't get served breakfast at those two. Is that correct? So why would we not include those in these numbers?
So we actually plan on including that information before the end of the project. We did receive that new Coastal Commission grant in August, and that is part of the funding in there.
So when we move forward to approving the KIP, if we do choose to approve what we have, that'll be with the caveat that further information is coming from you as far as adding those numbers in?
Right, and we'll take the preliminary policy direction that you give us, and that will help us frame the additional data gathering and additional analysis.
Okay.
And so it's things like doing that level of analysis for the short-term rentals, looking at other comparison jurisdictions to see what they are doing as well. We're also working for several other cities that are dealing with this same issue right now, so we're getting a lot of good information from them.
It just occurred to me rereading this thing again last night, and what Susan said I picked up too is that you're going to lose some of those accommodations with the climate change. So if we're looking forward to 2040, what are we going to provide?
And interestingly enough, when we submitted the grant application to Coastal with this study item in it, and in their approval, one of the things they asked us to do was specifically outline the effect of sea level rise on affordable accommodations.
We have to tie it to it based on the grant.
We have to do that. Right.
They were tracking right on that.
Right. And so if you experience a certain level of sea level rise, how does that then shift the affordability of your units?
Well, yeah, it makes. I've thought about this before. Is that we have to move our sewer plant because of sea level rise, but yet we would entertain campgrounds in that same area that'll be flooded out. So what? Hello, that doesn't make sense to me.
Campgrounds in that area that would be flooded out at certain times under certain conditions.
It's an adaptive response. I mean, it's just what you're willing to do.
I think too, and there's a seasonal element, because if you're going to really worry about sea level rise, you're going to have the biggest problem when you have storms, I would guess, and then most of that might be times when the campgrounds aren't heavily used. So I'm not sure how that enters into this, but
I don't know.
We've been complaining about things being dirty.
One of the issues that I think needs to be discussed a little bit is not just the number of lower cost accommodations we have, but the quality. I did a little informal survey, and depending on I looked at TripAdvisor, Orbitz, and Trivago, and between 15 and 40% of the people who stay in the lower cost accommodations rate the experience as being unsatisfactory. So, and to me, that's one of the threats to their existence. In other words, if they are allowed to deteriorate over time, eventually they won't be viable anymore. So it seems to me that one of the things that we kind of need to try and develop is some sort of a program to assist the owners or to encourage the owners, to improve that experience.
Coastal actually, in a separate meeting with them a while ago, said almost the same thing. They said, because we brought the issue up to them that I think we have fairly affordable units and a lot of them in town. So we're not running into the situation like, and I'll use Pismo because I know it. We didn't have a whole lot of affordable accommodations there, and so we were looking to deal with policies related to vacation rentals specifically and outlawing them in the residential neighborhoods. Coastal's like, nope, you can't do it. We want them on the west side of the highway, and you need to provide some kind of accommodation for it, because we didn't have our room rates were so high that they didn't find them to be affordable. And they're like, you don't have affordable rates. This is one option for families to come stay, and you can't outlaw them. So.
Well, and I think there's a trade-off, though. If you're talking about upgrading things, that's going to cost something.
Well,
and therefore, I'm just saying. I think we have to be really careful about. I think some of those. I've had some of my relatives stay at those places, and some of them are, you get what you pay for in some cases in that way. They don't expect to have a $300 hotel room when they've paid $45 a night.
Right.
Okay, they don't. But if you start having to upgrade those properties, even if it's a subsidized loan program or something, those things still have to be paid back. So I think we're just going to be really careful about that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking some of these in lieu fees that we're talking about would go a heck of a lot further if they went into establishing a revolving loan fund, which, the money could be reused and reused and reused and reused rather than just building some rooms and then it goes away. And the loans could be on such favorable terms that there might be some residual or some reciprocal agreement not to raise rates beyond the rate of inflation.
Well, then how will they pay back the loans? And I think that's, and should the city be subsidizing that versus all the other things we have to do? I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying, I don't know.
Another technique that's alluded to in here and could be further developed is there are jurisdictions, for example, where if you're coming in, you're proposing a higher end hotel project in the coastal zone. The commission's first preference is that in that project you do some lower cost units and you design it in such a way that the project consists of the higher cost and the lower cost. I think a lot of developers have found that that's really not a feasible way to do this, so that what they do instead is they pay an in lieu fee for the affordable portion. That in lieu fee is then used, for example, to rehabilitate and protect existing lower cost accommodations.
Yeah.
It could also be used to improve campgrounds or look at different RV park options or other recreational ways of improving access to the coast.
Is there a direct, when people pay in lieu fees right now, or is that just going to the general fund, or is it earmarked for that purpose?
Well, right now I don't know that we're collecting in lieu fees in relationship to hotel units because we're not building any. So we don't have.
Okay.
So a project hasn't come through that the Coastal Commission said, "Hey, you have to pay." We may have had in the past one or two of them. Probably wasn't much money, but imagine we didn't spend it because it's hard sometimes to spend it. They give it, turns it over to the city. The city has it, and then you have to find something to spend it on. I had a project again back when I was in Pismo where we had $90,000. The Coastal Commission's idea about what we should do with that is open a youth hostel. It was like, the city's not opening a youth hostel. And so we had no way to really spend the money. We said, hey, can we give it to state parks? They're doing some improvements to improve the campground. Is that okay? And they're like, no, you can't do that. And so we were stuck kind of holding the bag for several years, and I don't know. They probably still have the money. I don't know. It was like we couldn't find a way to spend it because we didn't have the program in place. What I think Jeff is alluding to is let's create the program, and then we have a mechanism to do that, so we can perpetuate those lower cost rooms and maintain them at a quality level.
But generally, in lieu fees go into a dedicated fund that can only be used for that. They don't go into the general fund.
I would take it a step further, and I would agree with that revolving fund. It could be set up similar to a facade improvement program that you do with downtown areas. But from my background, I really would encourage GPAC to look at putting some teeth in whatever regulations we craft for health and safety. Whatever units are allowed to remain in the city, besides the numbers on streets and stuff, we need to consider that there is off-street parking and that the units are inspected for health and safety, that they pass an inspection from a building inspector or code so that they are safe units, not just low income, low price. They need to be safe for the people that we're bringing in here, and to protect the surrounding residents too. You don't want a substandard bootlegged unit that someone's decided to make money off of as a vacation rental that has electric problems, whatever, a fire hazard, catches a house next door on fire. That's a detriment to the entire area. So, and I realize that we have that issue on units throughout the city that aren't related to vacation rentals, but we need to look at health and safety as we work through this.
We inspect units on a complaint basis, and we get complaints from residents, for folks that stay in hotel rooms and so forth. We get complaints about health and safety issues, and we inspect them.
Yeah, I'm talking about before they get their license that we've satisfied that they're
there's
safe.
a cost issue and a
Yeah.
manpower issue
Yeah.
associated with that.
It could be in that revolving fund. It could be paid out of there.
Okay, any further discussion on issue number 8?
How much teeth do you think it has to say to regulate coastal short-term rentals? I mean, is that going to be enough? Again, I'd really like to see it tied in with zoning, that maybe they're not allowed in certain residential areas. Is it enough to just say regulate?
I think we've heard a desire to ensure that
Okay.
there are differences
Okay.
between residential areas and commercial areas
Okay.
with respect to this, and I think we can work with staff to devise some ways of addressing that and then propose that.
And one thing on the sphere of influence ideas with Chevron area, maybe that's something to look at with the in lieu fees, and if we have sea rise and we're losing our state parks, and that's their land, they don't have anywhere else to relocate within the city limits that state. Maybe we look at adopting some of those areas as city, and you save that fund to help turn that into parks. That might be something Coastal would approve of.
Very well. Okay, issue 9 is downtown and waterfront connections. This is essentially an issue that we isolated and reserved so that the general plan provides guidance for the downtown planning effort, which we'll be talking about a little bit later in our agenda, and is the ongoing work on the downtown and waterfront strategic plan. So we start with a recommendation to prepare the plan. We're kind of already doing that. And then ultimately to implement it. And then to look at a master plan potentially for Morro Rock, ensuring consistency with neighborhood and community characteristics, looking at ways to improve multimodal transportation, both downtown and at the waterfront, and encouraging redevelopment or community use of vacant lots.
I think with the access options that they're looking at under the waterfront strategic plan with the funicular or the elevator, I think it would be good to find some way to use the parking up in sort of the downtown area for people visiting the waterfront, and that would also create people more walking back and forth sort of between those areas. I think bank parking lots, a lot of things that are available in the on the weekends that were for things that are not open could be used for that purpose, and just to let people know that those lots are there. If there's no parking down in the Embarcadero, they could go there and come down 2 blocks, take the funicular or whatever it is, and or stairs if they're able to, and can that those areas are connected and there's parking not far away that they can go to.
I'm not going to talk too much about this because I think it's going to be informed a lot by the workshops. The one thing I noticed, there's a sentence in the analysis that says many community members have noted a need for improved maintenance in both the public and private realms, talking about the downtown and waterfront districts, but there's no policy to address that, and it seems like there should be, And the second thing I just would like to kind of express, as we're getting gung-ho for the downtown waterfront connectivity, I think we also need to remember that the 2 districts do have unique characteristics, and connecting them doesn't necessarily mean homogenizing them, trying to make them match each other or something like that.
I'd like to reinforce that. I was talking with a friend at Mills the other day about this topic, and he said, I hope they don't connect them. So there are distinct characteristics between the 2 areas. There are different neighborhoods, probably different design guidelines. But if we decided we wanted to connect them, my hobby horse, and everybody needs one now and then, is a parking structure. Something like Susan is talking about on the bluff, because at that point you get people and pedestrians on both levels, and you can connect. It solves a whole lot of problems, I think.
I was not talking about, I think that's about the ugliest thing you could put on the bluff But some other place maybe would be good, but not along the water on the bluff.
I didn't say that. I said the opposite, not on the bluff.
No, oh, not on the bluff. Okay.
Not on the bluff.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Question. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, and by the way, when we talk about connectivity here, the issue is Main to Market. And that's where the connection needs to happen. It's not the Centennial Stairs, which function. They're not optimal, but they function. There's an ADA issue there, but that no man's land up there between Main and Market is a tough one to solve.
We are aware of that.
Yeah, I know.
I had a question from something in the report. It suggested residences on the second floor down on the waterfront. I was in the impression that that's not allowed, that you can't have people.
Can't.
And even the residences that are now on the waterfront, when those folks leave, there's not going to be an allowance for anybody else to come in. And perhaps you were just sort of referring to people living upstairs in the downtown area, but
Clarify that.
it said and waterfront district, so.
Where's that?
Page 36.
Page 36.
Oh, okay.
Third paragraph down.
Can you go over the map, what the master plan for Morro Rock might include? Is that parking lots down there, or what would that look like, or what are you thinking about that?
Less dust.
Through the stakeholder engagement and just discussing at the public workshop number 1 what improvements the community is looking forward to seeing, especially the low-hanging fruit that would be involved in the strategic plan. We heard a lot of input about Morro Rock, and some people were like, we need to formalize it, we need no potholes, and some people are like, no, keep it natural. So we're starting to explore what that looks like, and I think it requires more study and more discussion than is kind of set aside in this process. So as a follow-up item, that is something that really needs to be looked at. What is genuinely Morro Bay? What is the rock in the future, and what are the improvements, really appropriate improvements, look like?
Speaking to that item, I found it quite relaxing and enjoyable this winter when the numerous times that the gate was closed and we couldn't go any further on the south side. And as we walked through that, I envisioned an area there could be developed full-time closed with tables, and the bird people are already there with the falcons, and you could have that. And I don't think it would impact. I don't think you'd get pushback on that, because it's a really a log jam on when there is a lot of traffic there when it's open. So if you just park people on that big lot and just develop that into a pedestrian area, I think it would be
we've heard
very attractive.
I thought that was a really interesting idea that had been coming out of the input and stakeholder discussions, and what does that look like and what is appropriate. So do we need to formalize our seating area so that there is a place to sit and have lunch at a table, or is that too formal for us? So further exploring that in the form of a master plan would be
so maybe extending the walkway potentially around there that way, or something.
Yeah,
The closed off end is a tough takedown, just because that's not the city's state park.
But we could work together through the development of a master plan to make that happen. They would be a stakeholder, and they would be heavily involved if we were looking to cross those lines of whose property is whose, and how should it look in the master, in the bigger picture through a master plan. So.
And I think part of the other rationale for potentially looking at that as something to do down the road is to let whatever is going to happen next at the Dynegy site start to take form, because that in part will dictate the way that the rock interacts with the rest of both that project and then ultimately the rest of the community. And that's a give and take. I mean, that what happens there also needs to respect what's going on with the rock and the other
When do we
spaces.
get to that? Is that going to happen in the zoning discussion, or what? When do we start tackling that?
We will be
side?
getting to that as we start looking at land use alternatives, which is the next step from the KIP, right?
Just a kind of a technical question. We're talking about the downtown waterfront specific plan, and we're talking about maybe a master plan for the rock.
Beyond the life of this project.
And we're talking about, and we have the waterfront master plan. So we're getting a lot of documents that deal with the same area. Do you envision the waterfront master plan eventually being incorporated into the zoning ordinance? Is it incorporated into the general plan? Where I mean, to me, an expansion of the waterfront master plan seems the natural place for the planning for the Rock to go.
And that's what we've been talking about. I mean, we feel like that the plan, one, probably just needs to be refreshed, period, the waterfront master plan, and then it needs to be expanded to include that area. And so those are conversations that we've been having on an ongoing basis.
It could be one plan is the right solution.
Yeah.
An updated, so one strategy would be complete the downtown waterfront strategic plan, which is a sort of short burn, real emphasis on economic development and access kind of thing that informs an update to the longer term waterfront master plan, which has more teeth to it than the strategic plan does. And then that master plan could be extended to address these issues concerning the Rock. I mean, that's one way this could kind of all go into a linear form.
Could the waterfront master plan be rolled into the general plan and the zoning ordinance? I mean, the waterfront master plan is a pretty thick document, but the actual teeth of it is 4 or 5 pages. You know what I'm saying? Is that something we could put into the zoning ordinance?
I think that the downtown waterfront strategic planning process is an action plan to go do things.
Right.
It'll tell us to go, let's go update the waterfront master plan and then add in the Rock. Those will be things, and then I'll take those and I'm going to put those into my goals and objectives for out years in our budgeting process. Yeah. And we'll identify money towards them, council will budget towards them, we'll go do it. That's kind of what is going to be identified in the strategic plan. Yeah, this is to tell us what to go do in the future a little bit.
So you're saying the waterfront master plan continuing to exist as a standalone document?
Yeah, that's where our regulations lie for what happens down there. I think this may come up with the downtown waterfront strategic plan may identify things that people are interested in that we're not currently regulating. And so it might say, hey, go add these in. I think we'll find out because we're going to have a workshop on it.
Yeah, we can have some icons too in the strategic plan that say, and as you're updating the waterfront master plan in the future, we've already explored these with the community. These are things that should carry into that, whether it be lateral access or, we're going to be exploring some of those things as the next 5 to 10 year action items, and those should, be in there, and they should all be, these all should be consistent. We're setting a path for that and providing direction for them. So.
That'll be a change.
Good luck. Okay, any further comments on issue number 9?
Yeah. I didn't know where we're just kind of covering all of those, all the bullets. Yeah. When you're talking about page 38, first paragraph, the consistency, including making sure that the new and renovated buildings are compatible on issues of height, size, mass, and design, among other features. Had some visitors in town just last week, and we were walking down along the Embarcadero. I was going over some of the things. I was pointing out to them the proposed project with Libertine and Off the Hook and the proposal for that. And they said, oh, it'd be a shame for that Off the Hook to be tore down. They like the character of that. So it made me start thinking about that and making sure that we're going to have those ideas into our design process. I don't know if you're familiar with the city of Windsor. It's north of Santa Rosa. And what they took and they rebuilt old Windsor, historically, accurate. It's just, and they have this big park downtown that just brings in, it's a small town, but they bring in thousands of people every weekend for music and such. And it just occurred to me, are we going to be considering those items in that downtown development to make sure we preserve the character? If we have to tear our building down, can we put something that reminds us of what's there?
We actually are going to talk about that very shortly when we talk about the downtown waterfront strategic plan, because part of that task, and I'll show you the entire contents and what that document really will do. And part of that, a big part of that, is design guidelines. How do we want? What do we love about the development today? What do we want to perpetuate, and what do we not want to see more of? Is it disingenuous, tacked on architecture? How do we get to the things that really make Morro Bay and perpetuate that, so that staff have a tool to say, good job, Mr. Developer, but this is what the community is really looking for, and these are the elements that we like most because, they're genuine, they're authentic to Morro Bay and part of our history, and it's always nice to have an eclectic mix, but here's some good examples of how it's been done really well recently, so with quality materials. So that's part of our task too, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One last
Yeah,
item, and I apologize, Scott, I was going to try to get these questions to you beforehand, but item 9E, encourage redevelopment of community use of vacant lots. We were very successful in Escondido with an interim use land policy. We called it Adopt a Lot, where we, especially in the commercial areas, where we got a three-legged stool. We got the owner of the property, the city as a partner, and then a nonprofit organization. Put those three together, and we waived parking planning requirements because of interim use, and we got a lot of success and cleaned up these lots that we have around town and provided a benefit to the community at the same time. So I would push for that.
Yeah, those are policies and programs that can actually go into the strategic plan too, as well as the revolving loan program or facade improvement programs.
I think it all be wrapped together.
Those are some really neat things that can go into this toolbox. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Great.
Issue number 10, sea level rise resilience. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Issue number 10, sea level rise resilience policy options. This begins on page 39 of the paper. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of these. This is also identified as a coastal issue, something that we are being driven. Yes, sea level rise is a coastal issue, but capital C coastal issue. That we are being essentially, really required to consider this under the guise of the Coastal Act because of the potential to affect a number of assets throughout the community. This is informed in large part by the CVRA and as well as the specific sea level rise vulnerability assessment that was conducted as part of the community baseline assessment. Right. So there are 8 of these items listed here, and would appreciate your comments and suggestions.
It seems to me that we had, I think we talked about this a little bit before, but there's not a huge amount of area in Morro Bay, in at least the time frame we're looking at here, that is really at risk. Obviously, obvious places like the water treatment plant, you have to deal with that. And certainly the public assets like the campgrounds and things we have to address here. But I would also like to see some kind of communication with private property owners. I don't think it's the city's job to protect that property necessarily, but I think a communication effort. I know in certain areas of Sacramento, for example, that are low-lying, people are required to build, and sometimes do voluntarily, just build a certain level of feet up. So you have the garages on the bottom floor, and then you have the houses themselves raised so that if there's any kind of flooding issue, people will be safe. And so I think some kind of communication or outreach to private property that may be at risk, again, so that those property owners can be aware of that and begin to prepare, maybe before you even get any kind of development proposal. They're going to know that their properties are potentially at risk, and in fact maybe they might wish to take some action on their own. Again, it's not our job to do that work for them, but I think a communication effort would be a good idea.
And as part of that, I mean, there's the communication side and from kind of the outreach perspective, but the question I love that you guys ask us all the time is, does this relate to zoning? And this will, because ultimately where this goes is we determine a strategy. We put a map in the general plan that says this is the affected area by the planning horizon, and then in the zoning code we start to talk about what are the things you need to do if you're going to build a new structure.
Or even for existing structures.
Or for an existing
I think that's the kind of thing that people should know. When we had that last community workshop, when you had to put the maps up there, people were just sort of riveted by that. As well, where's my property? Where that kind of thing. I think that kind of communication should be part of this effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah, me too.
one of the things I really like to see was the possibility of the reuse of sediments from dredging up on the North Beach to sort of reinforce that, and I hope that's something that is allowed or deemed
It's
viable.
literally our next round of dredging and will include that probably,
Yeah,
likely.
makes
I mean, they
sense.
just,
It
the Army
totally
Corps
makes
just went out
sense.
with the RFP, and the one proposal that appears to be winning seems to be along those lines, would be putting
Yeah, totally makes
sand,
sense.
this time, to the north of it. Sometimes they do it in the near shore, depending on
Mm-hmm.
the amount that's dredged and the grain of the sand that they're pulling out of there. They can do that. Sometimes they can't, just depends.
So the
Jeff?
first
I'm sorry, go ahead.
first part on sea level rise, Jeff, there's 4 options as far as approaches. Are we going to be are you asking GPAC to look at that and make a recommendation on what we feel is the right approach? Or are we just kind of going over this
Well, I think
quickly?
it's a strategy that says, I think we're going to be looking at combinations of this ultimately. I mean, I don't think the do nothing is really much of an option.
I don't think folks are going
But
to be
it's in
happy.
the range of options. And then, so the way the way the policy recommendations break themselves down kind of follows this, which is you will have a number of assets that the appropriate response may be shoreline protection.
Right.
You can't really move them. So what can you do from a shoreline engineering perspective to protect them? Then there will be a number of assets where, maybe figuring out a way to move this asset to another location. I mean, you're in the process of literally doing that now. Maybe moving this asset to another location is the appropriate response. And so you've got those 2 broken down as individual policy recommendations. And then, the accommodation is, perhaps what do you do in your zoning code for new structures that would be in the inundation area by the planning horizon? And what steps do you need to recommend for existing structures from an accommodation perspective? An accommodation is essentially the units or buildings that are there. How do you harden them? How do you make them more resilient to potential inundation?
But my understanding is that the Coastal Commission has not looked favorably at all on protective structures for new development.
That's correct.
Have they changed that in view of sea level rise? Have they changed that position at all? Or
They actually, depending on where you're at, have a policy whereby if, like, say, this happened a lot on the bluffs when I was in Pismo, house would come forward, they would have their required setbacks based on erosion rates to the bluff, and they would have to record a deed restriction because this is supposed to be, so it's supposed to allow the structure to remain for a period of 100 years. They're like, okay, great, here's your extra condition that you add on here, and you have to record a deed restriction against your property that says, even if something happens, you agree that you won't come forward and request a seawall within that 100-year horizon. It's very controversial.
so basically, the answer is basically going to be in those areas that are going to be at risk. We won't be developing in all likelihood.
And in all likelihood, the pressure is going to be to avoid development in those locations. Right?
Makes sense.
Kind of. But yes.
As I read through this too, Jeff, just I wanted to throw it out. I don't know if it's in our purview to ask for this or not, but I would see an item 10I, and I was calling it community education.
Agreed.
Can we put that into our document that we formally put together some sort of an education program to counter the naysayers that we pop up every now and then, that we have some clear education for our community. Even starting it into the schools and get a program to start at the younger ages to bring it all the way up to adulthood as far as the importance and the consequences. The kids that aren't even born now will be facing the impact of 2040. Agreed. So wouldn't it be nice that they at least knew that, hey, somebody's going to be, those kids are going to be a lot smarter than us, and they're going to say, why in the heck did you guys not let us know about this?
I think that would go nicely with item 10G, the beach monitoring. We had a written comment from Melanie, who isn't able to be here. 10G, about who's going to measure whether the beaches are actually changing and the sea level rise is happening, and so that could go hand in hand with that education process, especially with kids who might have time to help with the the beach work. Did you want to say something?
May I ask a question? It seems that 10A, 10B, maybe 10C are elements of a plan. And so what we're recommending here is that we're asking for a plan that we can implement to lay out the priorities among these different activities and the different approaches. Set the goal?
Yeah, and that's where we go from here.
Okay.
Is, based on what's in the vulnerability assessment, we consider that information and then we come up with the strategy.
Okay.
And all of these, I believe, are components of the strategy. The right fix isn't going to be the same for every asset. And there are a number of existing assets that are already protected by a number of structures. And so that's why you then see the emphasis on, okay, so for those structures that we already have, what's the strategy for helping them withstand what's anticipated to happen?
Are we going to be looking at building in for budgeting purposes, if we identify, for example, things that need to be, break walls that need to be raised? I realize that's state, but somehow we're going to have to do some long-range forecasting on the funds that are going to be required to do those physical improvements to protect those different properties. How are we going to do that?
I mean, that certainly could be some direction that comes out of this. The city needs to start budgeting for them. It's kind of like the city of Morro Bay hasn't really ever, other than the last 2 years, budgeted for replacement of things like vehicles in the building that we're sitting in here today and those types of things. It would be something along those lines where you put money, away every year to accommodate those types of things. If you know you're going to have to move your wastewater treatment plant off the beach, or your desal plant that's also right next to it in floodplain. So yeah, I mean, that makes sense to inform those types of things so that you're taking budgetary strategies to reflect that, because the city's not done that in the past, and we're just now starting to do it over the last couple of years. So it would be something along those lines.
We concentrate on sea level rise. I don't know if this is, but the whole topic is climate change, right? And so climate change may influence a lot more things than just sea level rise. Is that dealt with in a separate area someplace, or climate change is going to probably change our ecosystem, our the species of plants and animals that exist here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's addressed. That particular example is addressed in the ESHA discussion. But yes, we're definitely looking, and as we approach updating the safety element, we are required to look at the effect of adaptation in general across all kinds of different hazards: flooding, wildfires, precipitation changes, changes to habitat. All of that is required for us to look at.
I think the water issues, water supply issues, of course, would be high on that list.
Right. Issue 11, Measure D. So this Measure D. So this is the issue on commercial fishing industry and Measure D policy options. Perhaps the most important item here is clarifying the meaning of clearly incidental uses. Under Measure D, my understanding is there's a whole separate process underway, and I might just ask Scott to provide a quick update on that from work that the Planning Commission's been doing on Measure D as a way of getting us going into this topic. But ultimately, we're looking at that as well as reducing potential conflicts between commercial fishing and coastal recreation, and assisting the commercial fishing industry to adapt and change with both changes to the climate that are occurring and economic changes.
From the Measure D standpoint, because we agendized it in the Planning Commission, discussed it, and what I would take away from that discussion was we have a lot of work to do there. It was how you talked for a couple of hours on the subject, and as you might imagine, this has been something that's been controversial for the city for a long time, and it probably is something over time that we need to pick up and take forward and figure out what we're going to do, what we're doing, because it creates a lot of angst, and it would be nice if we could have less angst when it comes to this. But I think we didn't really get too far in figuring out what it meant, other than it was going to take a lot more work, and it wasn't part of current goals and objectives, as such, but could be part of the discussion that we had in here and coming out of this and getting input from the public and so forth to sort of inform that was kind of where I left it.
Let me just suggest that it's not just the phrase "clearly incidental" that needs to be clarified. Virtually every word in Measure D needs to be clarified, and to try and figure out how any interpretations are consistent with the way it's been applied in the past is, it's very difficult. And we could talk for hours, and we won't accomplish anything. But it does seem to me that, considering the fact that there is so much confusion, one of the policy options that ought to be considered is simply rewriting it and putting it on the ballot.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. I think examination of first of all, I'd like to see some more exploration of.
Well, the ballot measure's still out there, so you have to take it back through that process. I mean, I think.
Yeah, I know.
No, it was
yeah, go ahead. No, I didn't want to interrupt you guys, but I guess I agree with that. I think that we need to. I'd like to see a little more exploration of ways to use that part of that. It's a big part of the Embarcadero, and ways to have some other uses there that don't impede anything that is having to do with the fishing industry. And that may require some kind of changes to Measure D, but it seems like there's a lot of amenities, a lot of things at one end, and then once you kind of get down there's a couple of restaurants, and that's pretty much it. If you want to buy some water or something, you just can't really do it. So there's the development across the street that kind of ties in there a little bit, but not really. So I think it would be good to look at possibly some development options down there, but that don't, as long as they don't impede, or maybe could even help the fishing industry. Maybe amenities could be installed that would really help them as well. Maybe some kind of shared use thing. I don't know. Anyway, it's just a general feeling, but it's almost like you kind of, everything ends, and then you're down there, and between there and the rock, there's just not that much going on. And maybe that's okay, but I think we should at least give that some thought.
So, Scott, the original purpose of Measure D was at a point when people were concerned about the fishing industry being viable, losing ground, not having. I mean, it had to have been brought forward with a specific purpose to preserve something about this community.
There was a lot of redevelopment happening over there, and the fishing industry, and that was sort of the backlash from the fishing industry, saying we're going to get pushed out if we don't do something.
Right.
And I don't know that I would say their concern was valid, because you saw a lot of development that had nothing to do with the fishing industry happening, and it was happening fairly rapidly, is my take on it. And so that was the response, was, hey, we need to preserve an area down here for it so we can continue to have a fishing industry, a viable fishing industry. Not token, I think, was kind of really, some of the underlying comments that I've taken away from a lot of the folks that were around back then that I've talked to, in the couple of years that I've been here. That's my sort of digestion of the process and sort of putting that back out there. That's what I took, and it seems, based on what was happening at the time, that it was not an unreasonable response to it. There was a real concern. It would have been better to do it through zoning, I think, because when you do it through referendum, you get what we have right now, and it's a lot of sort of unequal application of what it means, and it changes over time, and you really can't look at the policies and look at what's out there and go, I'm not really sure where they went with that to put that there. I mean, it's kind of,
Yeah,
because I think the protection's important, and I think, if what they need is more ice machines, that's not pretty, and it's not sexy, and it's not, oh boy, let's go look at the ice machines, and it doesn't generate a whole lot of money, but it supports that industry, and it's a need that they have, and they got to have a place for it. And if we had more of those kinds of support systems for that industry, then the industry itself can get bigger and better and stronger, and then that generates more revenues for the town. So,
and I think there's virtually universal support for that sentiment. The problem is that when you have a document here that you're then trying to apply to a specific situation, and it doesn't fit. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the word primarily, this talks about clearly incidental. To me, one of the biggest problems in Measure D is the word primarily. Because what is it primarily means that the customers of a use have to be primarily commercial fishermen, and it really works to the detriment of the industry, because if we had a new fuel dock, most of their sales are going to be to pleasure boats, but they're definitely going to benefit the fishing industry. The same with the boat haul out, the same with the marine repair facilities, so that's why I think I don't know. I think it's almost time to change the language and say what we mean.
Yeah, say what we mean.
I think that Dr. Teft has a great idea in going out, and because the community is in such support of this function, I don't think we're at risk of losing it.
No.
I would like to raise one other point, though. We're talking about crafting language to regulate a market. In a previous life, I tried to write regulations to regulate long-term care facilities. And I can tell you that when you start trying to regulate a market, you go down a black hole. And it gets extremely difficult to craft language that'll cover all of the eventualities. Maybe we ought to be focusing on a process for making a decision that has enough authority to be able to adapt flexibly to changing circumstances and different kinds of things that come up, because it's almost impossible to anticipate every market-driven event.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. Although in the past, I would say excessive flexibility has been the problem rather than inadequate flexibility.
Is that an issue in the process or
And I think this is something Scott and I were sidebarring a little over here, is the general plan, the local coastal program, and the zoning code is the place to say what we mean. And if we do that and we can hammer it out, at a very top level by starting with, in our vision, this is really important to the community that we protect the commercial fishing industry. In our policies, that we talk about the types of uses that should be allowed in the area to protect the commercial fishing industry. And then in our zoning, we define districts and we really dial in the provisions of exactly what we mean. If we do those things in a linear and correct fashion, and we're all comfortable with what we're saying and it's what we mean, the potential exists that Measure D could go away because the general plan and the zoning adequately address the issue. That would require voter approval of those provisions, but it gets rid of the measure and puts these provisions into your legislative documents.
Well, in my mind, if something like, say, a fuel dock or ice stations or haul-out facilities, all of that kind of stuff, if that is supported by the recreational people, which means it's provided for the commercial fishermen, that's gold. Then you've got what you need there for both populations.
Of course.
It completely makes sense.
Of course. The problem is just the language.
Yeah.
The problem is that's not what it says.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And that's what was meant when it was passed.
Sure.
To promote those kind of uses, it just wasn't. It could have been written better.
Well, and it was a different time.
Yeah.
So does item 11A actually say rewrite me?
I think we've heard a lot of direction tonight that can help us redo 11A.
Okay.
That it is about more than clearly incidental. It's about, I heard the term say what we mean, which is more what this is about.
Yeah.
Which is, let's clarify this. Let's say exactly what we mean. Let's do it here and do it in our zoning and let it go. I mean, get the words out there, get this locked in these documents and let it roll.
Yeah. Jeff, it would seem like other general plan and then zoning regulations that would give more stability to that area, where future councils that may change we wouldn't have what's happened before. Is that correct?
Well, you're still going to have a council that interprets policy, but the intent of putting it into the policy language and the zoning is to increase that predictability for the future, for the property owners, for any future investors, for the industry itself, is to set that standard in your plan and your zoning so that it's predictable.
well, I don't want to speak too bluntly on it, but it would seem like if we have it in this document like we're proposing, then council would have to think twice and be subject to a possible lawsuit if they would ignore that document.
I will say this, future development has to be found consistent with general plan.
That's
Right.
okay.
That's
We're saying the same thing.
There is still discretion, there is still leeway, but the requirement remains it has to be consistent with general plan. So the clearer the language in the general plan, the more predictable things will be.
But I think we have to recognize that Measure D, as flawed as it is, has worked. Okay, I mean that end of the Embarcadero is clearly different from the center of the Embarcadero. So we've got a starting point, which is not necessarily what Measure D says, but how Measure D has been used over the last 20 years.
Right.
Yeah, and to me, the discussion that we had at Planning Commission was very useful, especially having Eric there, because
Absolutely.
it fleshed that out. It said, we know, but this is what we've been doing,
Eric gave a lot of really good, there's a lot of really good reasonings why decisions were made, how they were made. He's a wealth of knowledge for things that have happened down there over time because he's been around for a while and has that historical knowledge. So I think he added a lot to that conversation. I agree with Chair Taft.
And he's really practical. He's got a really practical mind.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Issue 12, environmentally sensitive habitat areas, or ESHA. This is another capital C coastal requirement that, in your local coastal program, you're required to identify environmentally sensitive habitat areas and to map them, and then to place certain provisions regarding how conservation occurs in those areas and to restrict future development from them. So we have 6 provisions related to ESHA that are presented here. One other development since the original preparation of this document is that the additional coastal grant funding that we've mentioned on a couple of occasions previously also includes a task to enable us to accomplish 12A, which is to take the city's existing data about ESHA and conduct a thorough and comprehensive assessment of it and remap it if necessary to bring forward a comprehensive citywide map that's reliable of the environmentally sensitive habitat areas. To date, my understanding, and Scott can elaborate on this, is the city's lacked that. They're kind of all over the place and not consistent one with another. So the intent of this is to create a scientifically based, comprehensive assessment of the ESHA in the city. And again, one of the things Coastal asked us to do between when we submitted the grant and when we were awarded the funding was to ensure that that's also reflective of how ESHA may change based on what we know about climate change. So that's something that will enter the analysis for 12A. So that, I guess I just sort of bring that out as this is one that's already underway and is something that we'll begin working through as part of the existing scope of work. It's not being kind of pushed out for a future item.
I think I'd also like to see some kind of communication element here, communication for visitors and even for people who live here. I do a fair amount of kayaking, and you see a lot of people getting too close to the animals or doing just something basic like that. I think people, it's very interesting to them and they're curious, but I think the rules about those kinds of things and some of the environmentally sensitive areas, I think it would be good for people to know about these things. I don't know where this comes in or if it's a state park thing, but I know the whole, and I may have, some people with pitchforks and torches coming in, but the idea of hunting and the whole bird thing, I don't know. I mean, I feel like, I don't know if this is the place to bring that up or if some other part of this process is appropriate, but I know people have very strong feelings on both sides of that, but I feel like that should be an item of discussion somewhere in this process.
Would that be a general plan thing, though, or is that more of a
like to
put it on
resign
the
from
ballot
the
thing?
I'd like to resign from the committee now.
It's talking about the area out on the sand spit where they allow hunting and it's regulated by a state park.
But I don't, I mean, that to me, I'm not sure that's something we can address in the general plan. That would have to go on the ballot, wouldn't it, as...
I mean, it's
I mean,
state parkland where it's regulated, so it's
not
under your jurisdiction. Yeah, it's not under, exactly.
Does the city have a position on that? Does the city, does the state parks pay any attention if we did? But, I mean, do we? Have we?
I mean, have we reached out more recently and talked with them? I'm not sure. I know we have in the past had conversations because it's been an issue that the council's raised and requested that staff do so. I don't know that I know what's happened or what the positioning on that has been from the position of state parks, though. I don't know that I've ever heard what that is. I mean, it's something I have to go look into.
Well, I'd just like to see that, as I said, on the table somewhere in this process. And I don't know where the right place is. I don't know if we could have any influence on it, or certainly it sounds like it's not in our jurisdiction. But if we, anyway, I think it should be on the table somewhere.
I'm a member of the Morro Bay Bird Festival Board, and this comes up every year. We have 500 people coming here, and they're listening to people shooting at brant geese, which are not good to eat, by the way. So the thing is that the Fish and Game controls certain rights in there, and the hunters right now are guaranteed access on a portion of the southern part of the bay. And they fund a lot of the research and work on the estuary. So there's a bit of a conflict in that in the regulation. An issue that's been going on for years. And it has increased a lot of passion on both sides for years.
Same way.
And at this point, I don't see a resolution because the hunters have rights that are protected by Fish and Game.
Bird festival up there.
Well, state, anyway. Yeah.
Well, Scott would, or Jeff, either one. Is the state, this land we're describing, this area for the hunting, it's a state park governed at all by our sphere of influence type of? Do we have any control over that?
State parks has. I think they have jurisdiction over most of the sand spit.
So does state state parks trump our jurisdiction as far as relation to sphere of influence, or is that not even?
That's in the city. I don't think the sphere extends over there, and they're a superior state agency.
Okay, so they beat us.
So, I mean,
okay.
that by itself is they trump where they have jurisdiction.
I'm just kind of bringing out just to kind of, is this a horse we won't even deal with? I mean, it sounds like there's nothing we can do.
What I would say is I would like to go back and look into what those conversations that we've had previously with them on this issue, because this issue has been around for a long time.
Well, but also we have to keep in mind, guys, that the residents have not really made their voice clear on this, because as you point out, it's very divisive. There's some people who would be very much against, so in other words, if we were to go forward and talk to State Park and Fishing, on whose behalf would it be? We couldn't really say it's on behalf of the residents of Morro Bay, because
No, but I guess what I'm saying is in this process that maybe could be considered, and this is supposed to be the voice of the citizens of Morro Bay, and maybe they would decide not to do anything. I don't know.
I was more along the lines, go find out what conversations.
But I think that's
because I don't know. I mean, I was really just saying.
For lack of a better term, it's good to get a baseline of kind of our status of.
That's where I was going.
Where are things right now?
The conversations that have been had have been at high volume.
Yeah.
And
as pertains to the general plan, I mean, I think subject to refinement and or correction by the city attorney at some point, I think about the extent you could get to would be to have a policy, essentially a discouragement policy, because you really have no jurisdiction.
Yeah.
But then I would kind of build on one of Dr. Teff's thoughts of, is having that discouragement policy potentially worth the divisiveness that could bring? And what that could influence.
I guess I'm saying I don't know the answer to any of these questions. I know my personal opinion, but that doesn't mean everybody agrees or anybody agrees. So I think it should be on the table as an item of conversation. That's all I was saying. So we may decide everyone agrees, but we still can't do anything about it or whatever.
But one could
I
adopt a
would like
policy.
to have the conversation.
One could eventually adopt a policy saying that it's the policy of the city of Morro Bay to discourage said activity.
And you could even then work with state parks to do something. Or if it turns out that the citizens of Morro Bay fully support it, well, then that would be the policy, and you wouldn't do anything else then. So I'm just saying, all I know is my own opinion, but I think that we could at least discuss the issue.
Jeff, could you explain a little bit? I don't understand 12E because right now, basically, the city policy protects all ESHA areas, and this seems to be saying we're going to prioritize some to preserve, and we're going to let others go, which would be a step back.
I thought I read that as you're going to try and preserve all of them, but you have some priorities, and if people are doing development and they have to, they need to do some mitigation for other reasons. For other reasons that they would, you target the mitigation to come here, but I don't know. Is that?
That was kind of part of my question. Is are we talking about priorities for sort of restoring ESHA, or?
I think what this is getting at, as I'm reading it again, is it's establishing perhaps within the ESHA potentially mitigation sites, establishing high priority areas either within as a whole ESHA or within an ESHA that could be used as potential mitigation for new development elsewhere.
For restoration of that. In other words, restoration of that.
Further restoration of that area could be used as mitigation.
Mitigation for what?
For new development that could impact other locations.
But then we're saying those areas of ESHA are not so important and we're going to let them be impacted?
Our code does that now. It allows us to reduce buffers. In areas where
up to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Up to 50 feet.
Some mitigation that could come out of that for the reduced buffer could be paying into that mitigation bank to enhance the area that's over there where we want to create it. Because some of the areas that are identified currently in our mapped ESHA areas are really degraded. And the likelihood of bringing them back and the cost associated with that, probably not feasible. So, but there are other areas where with some funding and some work, we probably could reestablish, better quality environmentally sensitive habitat, and so that could happen. I mean, like I said, our code does it now. It makes us go evaluate the ESHA that's adjacent to it and determine what impacts, and you have to do that if you want to reduce buffers, meaning setbacks to that area. Now, I don't know if we're going to have the exact same policies, moving forward, but that's in place now. So you can see where that would be another mechanism to do it. It could be an example. One of the issues we have is eelgrass, and creating eelgrass banks and not having one-off mitigations for eelgrass impacts adjacent to areas where development's happening or boat docks are would be great, because what happens is those leaseholders get stuck in an endless circle. They're like, you have to reestablish the eelgrass that you're having an impact to. It has to be established at 90%. Well, they never get there, and so they just keep sending a diver out there every year to evaluate it, and they're like, you're still not here. And so it's thousands of dollars they're throwing away having a diver go out there and do the evaluation and tell them they're not there. It would be much better if they could take the money, hand it to the mitigation bank, where they could reestablish eelgrass, as an example. So that's actually something we really need to do. So
yeah, not only that, I almost feel that the eelgrass should be mentioned specifically because the loss of eelgrass has been such a huge, had made such a huge difference on the ecology of the bay that, and that's where I kind of see restoration as being really important.
Yeah,
if we can figure out how to do it.
We're still kind of evaluating the impacts.
Can you give an example of the areas you mentioned that are beyond recovery?
They're small because they're individual parcels. What they've done is they've done their biological evaluation on an individual parcel off of one of the drainages that we have. They said, in these areas, and we tested it through Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife, we're getting a biologist telling us there's really not a lot of economic environmental value in this area, And so that was used to substantiate the reduction of the buffer. We didn't have any other thing to go along with it. That was just used, and we ran it through the responsible agencies for that, and they said, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we agree with you. This isn't really environmentally sensitive habitat at all, other than you have it mapped and it's associated with the drainage. That's one of the examples. But we also have other ones. One of the things that Jeff was talking about earlier was increasing the mapping and improving it. Is the city's identified a lot of areas out there that are environmentally sensitive habitat associated with development, and we've not mapped them, which is why we wanted to do this, because we just have those areas mostly associated with drainages in the city and nothing else. But we've found them elsewhere. Our policies say you're going to map them when you find them. We didn't do that. And so now we want to go back and do that so people know, because what happens is it's a big surprise to them. They come in, they don't know, they find out later, and then it's going to cost. Drastically, they've done the design now. They have to redesign it. It just costs them thousands of dollars to do that. You don't like surprises. I don't like people coming in and finding that out. I would rather us know where these things are, and we're able to tell the public when they come in, and it's in our documents. It's clear in there, so they know what the parameters that they're proposing development under.
So those areas, they were determined based strictly on cost and not public input then, as far as deciding that they were irrecoverable?
They're not irrecoverable. It's just the cost associated with them and the degradation that's taken place in them, because they've been disked out over time. Most of the streams, right? We don't have, but most of the streams are intermittent at best, and so there's nothing feeding them, and so there's not a whole lot of habitat there.
I guess I'm wondering if we should be speaking to that in our document, so when people wonder how these decisions are made, they can actually read it in there and see, oh, this is how we decided to get to this from point A to point B, or is that adding more pages to our general plan that we don't want?
It's a fair question. I have to give some thought to that.
But the other question I have, I guess, is where do these buffers come from? I mean, how does a certain buffer get to be 100 feet, but can be reduced to 50 feet in urban areas, and then can be reduced to less than that? It seems to me that we have a kind of a one-size-fits-all buffer, and is that scientific? Is that?
Ours came from existing policy that the Coastal Commission was using at the time. I've seen, they've probably seen much more than me, examples of them doing it differently in other areas based on the type of issue that's identified. So certainly, that's probably even a more common thing now. I don't know that they so much do the kind of, you were saying, one size fits all necessarily anymore. They usually like to know what the issue is, and then that kind of sometimes tells you, because some of it's more susceptible to development than others, other things. So it just kind of depends. I think
our experience is that they tend to be variable based on the resource you're identifying and its significance. And this is something. And we will be having conversations at the staff level with the Coastal Commission staff. This is something we'll explore with them. What are your best practices and how can we better use them?
And I also think we have to keep in mind that probably the biggest potential impact to ESHA in the community is not development. It's intervention by pedestrians, by recreation. A lot of our ESHA is dune, is dune area. And so rather than just focusing on development, we have to focus on use as well as that.
I just have one thing. Every time I read these about habitat or preservation of lands, I keep thinking we talk. There's even language in here about within the city, and obviously these things are not within the city. So this has always been a little bit confusing to me how our general plan can direct us to look at areas outside our boundaries, but in our planning area. So we're connected. Morrow Creek, parts of it are in the ESHA maps. They may be actually more degraded. But as soon as you get outside of the city limits, it's not red anymore, And is there some way our policies, our conversations with people outside there can expand those buffers on those watersheds in those riparian areas. And the reason is that they form corridors for wildlife, and they connect all of these systems have to be contiguous or they don't work. So it's just a question. I don't know how much our plan can do that, but I'd like to see something in there for our intent to do that.
Yeah, I think from a general plan perspective, if we're delineating environmentally sensitive habitat areas, we're going to do it in the planning area as a whole. But I think that's another good question for us to raise with coastal staff from the perspective of the LCP, and whether they would entertain identification of ESHAs by the city in an area that's under the jurisdiction of the county, for example. I mean, that's a little bit tricky, and we'll need to work through that with coastal.
Yeah.
In the county's LCP, because it's been updated relatively recently, probably accommodates it better than we do, because ours hasn't. So, I mean, it might be something to look to what's there, and at least have something that's as good or better. So.
All right, I've left us 12 minutes to talk about transportation metrics. So this is addressing both level of service and vehicle miles traveled. And we talked a bit about this in the context of the CBA, but this is in response to Senate Bill 743, which was passed a couple of years ago, that essentially says, for purposes of the California Environmental Quality Act, so in the context of initial studies, negative declarations, EIRs, a proposed project cannot measure its performance in terms of significant traffic impacts using level of service, using our traditional A, B, C, D, E, F, how well do streets perform, how congested are they, how congested are intersections. Rather, the city needs to develop a mechanism to look at those impacts that clearly reduces vehicle travel and greenhouse gas emissions. That LOS alone doesn't do those things. And that it's the objective of the state, and in line with AB 32, now SB 32, and other pieces of legislation, to enhance or transform the transportation system in such a way that it is reducing vehicle travel and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. One way of doing that that's been recommended to this point by the Governor's Office of Planning and Research is to establish metrics that are based on vehicle miles traveled as opposed to level of service for use under CEQA. Now, that's not to say that the city shouldn't or can't continue to employ a level of service metric. That level of service metric can remain in your general plan. It can be something that you hold projects accountable to. It can be a means to help both fund and improve your roadway system. You simply can't use CEQA to obtain those things any longer through level of service. You need different mechanisms. One mechanism could be your general plan coupled with a roadway improvement fee and program that's based on LOS. You can still do that. But for CEQA, you've got to use VMT. So for the purposes of the general plan, the approach that we have recommended is that you do both. That you establish a vehicle level of service standard, employ that in your general plan, continue to use that as a basis for collecting roadway impact fees and improving the transportation system, and that you establish vehicle miles traveled metrics for purposes of CEQA. So that when you have a new project that comes in, you're asking the applicant to look both at how do you impact congestion and our roadway system, and how are you reducing greenhouse gases in the transportation sector by reducing VMT. You're essentially going to be asking people to do both things.
Okay, I have a couple questions about this. Are we looking, when you look at, let's say, vehicle miles traveled, is it only within the city limits? Does it include trips that are initiated in the city to elsewhere, or from elsewhere to come into the city? Or what's the scope of that kind of a measure
Typically,
usually?
the approach is to look at, like when we measure VMT, the approach is to look at what does the city actually have jurisdiction over. There's very little, if anything, you can do about pass-through traffic.
Right.
Traffic that originates in San Luis Obispo.
Right, but if there's a
and is going
project
up the coast.
that's built here, and I assume you're talking about this in terms of development, if there's a project that's built here, developed here, and it and it has some impact on traffic, do we look is that sort of constrained within our borders? Does it assume, let's say people would drive here to do the thing, whatever the thing is, or people would get stuff here and go somewhere else, or do whatever? Do we have, what's the scope of what we really should
When you're looking at it for an individual project, you're considering all the trip behavior associated with that project. So, for example, if you were to build an employment use here and people were commuting from
so you have to include all of that kind of
all of that
thing. Okay.
At the project level.
Okay, and then how does the whole electric vehicle situation kind of go with that? Because you could have vehicle miles traveled, but if they're non-emission or low-emission vehicles, natural gas or electricity, they're not going to be directly related necessarily. So how does that, and the state has goals to implement those kind of things. I don't know, hydrogen vehicles, I know they were talking about for a while. So how does that interact with, say, the vehicle miles traveled?
Agreed, and in fact, that's an area that all of this is still kind of catching up to. But my understanding is that as the models that are looking at VMT are refined, as they're continuing to be built and refined, those assumptions are entering the picture.
Okay,
so there might be like a reduction or a deduction that you would take in VMT to account for.
So if somebody would install an electric vehicle charger or something like that, that potentially could be mitigation for the miles traveled.
That could be a potential mitigation to offset vehicle miles traveled. Right.
Is VMT replacing ADT?
No, ADT would still be used in the LOS calculation.
ADT, average daily trips.
Right. That would still be generated, and it would be a part of the LOS calculation.
Okay, so we're going to be speaking of that too in our general plan. Okay.
Right. Yeah, and again, the intent here is to make a recommendation that the city and future applicants look at both. That when you're looking at your environmental document, you're looking at the potential traffic impact associated with VMT, and you're still going to look at LOS because you'll have an LOS standard in your general plan. So when you're looking at the CEQA document, one of the things you have to do is say, is the proposed project consistent with the general plan?
It seems like the LOS is more of the local impact, and the VMT could be, I guess that's also local, but over time that would be more of the sort of greenhouse gas.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, and I would translate local to be sort of immediate surroundings impact. You're using LOS to say, if you're putting in a new project, you're using your LOS standard to say, how are you impacting the 4, 5, or 6 intersections or 12 intersections around you? But you're using the VMT impact to say, how are you affecting vehicle travel in the city as a whole or the region as a whole?
Well, and air quality as well.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, when I read through the 3 different policy options, they seem to deal primarily with evaluating new projects. Mm-hmm. It seems to me we should have a policy option in here somewhere that says once the city has established its LOS standards, it's then going to go out and fix the existing intersections which don't meet those LOS standards. I mean, we need a mechanism. We have, we do have intersections now that are probably D's or maybe even lower in some cases.
I think you'd have to include a funding mechanism to go on.
Well, I mean, at this point we're at the general plan level. The option would be to develop that program. In other words,
it would be evaluation of our traffic impact fees. I mean, that's what we predominantly use now. That and then state funding opportunities for things associated with traffic, but those haven't really been all that available recently, which is why we have the measure on the upcoming ballot to tax ourselves over the next 9 years.
Is the self-help. VMT, ADT, and LOS all going to be used to create the circulation element of the general plan then?
Yes. Yeah, all of those would be addressed in the context of the circulation.
This is our steps working towards the required circulation element from the state.
What we're seeing in jurisdictions that are maybe 2 or 3 steps, or maybe not that far in terms of time. We're probably talking 6 months or 8 months ahead of you at this point. But where we're seeing these circulation elements go is establishment of side by side an LOS standard and a VMT standard.
Right.
And that both are provisions of the general plan.
And the circulation element can speak to what Dr. Teff was talking about, going back and taking care of the intersections, et
To the
cetera.
degree that the funding, I mean, I think
Yeah,
there's
and building
there's a
the
whole
budget from
separate-
that, yes,
Right.
understood.
It helps you create your capital projects
Right,
list over
right.
time, and you look at funding sources to take those things down as they come up. So
Right, 5-year CIP then.
exactly.
What do you do? I mean, I understand what you do with the LOS standard. It's probably involves paying some fee to help mitigate or actually improving some area. But what do you do with the VMT standards? I mean, if it exceeds a certain threshold, then what?
There's a number of different ways. One very popular method now is to create some screening criteria, which essentially could consist of a map that basically, based on the land uses that you've configured in your plan, you're going to generate VMT based on the location of those uses relative to the other uses. You run the traffic model, it will tell you what the VMT associated with individual locations is. You can create essentially a map that's then used as a screening criteria to say some areas in the city are green, some are yellow, some are red, based on the mix of uses that's there and that's planned for the future, provided you follow the plan. If you're in a green area, you can be presumed to have a less than significant impact of VMT. And so part of it can be based on location. And if you're in a desirable or good location from a VMT perspective, you're good to go. If you're not, then maybe you need to do the analysis, actually run through an individual model run on the project and see what comes back. And you may be all right, or you may be looking at mitigation. And there, in the red areas, you're basically saying, we're likely discouraging uses that are inconsistent with the plan at these locations, and you're going to need to model and mitigate. So I mean, there's ways of doing that from a location-based perspective, but ultimately the idea and the vision of at least the state behind the investment they're making in this is that the models will be available to allow you to model the impact of any individual project on VMT relative to a bright line standard.
And is the mitigation local? In other words, would it be let's say there's a mitigation fee, and would that go to the city? Would it go to the air quality control district? Would it go?
All to be determined. But that's, I mean, we're very much at the very front end of this. A lot of the answers to these questions are still being wrestled with by OPR and the guidance that they're publishing.
And when you were asking about, when you were talking about how it's calculated, then it seems that, I mean, Morro Bay, the average commute time is 18 minutes, which is far beyond the boundaries of our city, right? So it seems like Morro Bay would, in effect, be sort of penalized because of the fact that people are commuting?
Well, there are different sheds within which you can calculate this VMT. It can be at the city level, it could be at the regional level. That could vary by land use type. If you're looking at one that's more of a job generator, you may calculate that at the regional level, understanding that there's going to be interplay between the locations in the region.
But let's say you're building a house, okay? Are you going to get penalized in terms of VMT because the average commute distance in Morro Bay is greater than it would be in,
Not necessarily,
Paso,
because I
probably.
think you're going to take into account what that existing average is as part of setting your goal. So your goal, for example, could be a percentage reduction from the existing.
So you're really
You work away at that over time with project by project.
So you're working against the status quo rather than against standards for Paso or for Atascadero.
Correct. You start with, what is the existing condition and what is the reduction we're seeking to achieve, and that is all aligned then with your greenhouse gas reductions. So if you're committing to a certain level of greenhouse gas reductions, that's going to translate into a certain level of VMT reduction, but that's from existing. And you work away at it project by project as you're approving new projects.
You reference SB 375 on page 54, and that we're charged with reducing VMTs 8%. Does SB 375 have any language that specifies penalties to cities if we don't reach that goal? And so we would kind of need to know that as part of
The primary penalty to not achieving your goals in the sustainable community strategy is transportation funding. It's regional transportation funding for funds that would come through SLOCOM.
So that's important to have in our documents so people know that if we don't get this, we're going to lose significant revenue to our already short-funded budgets. Okay. So we'll have it in there. Then.
There is an impact there.
Okay. But we'll speak to it in the
We will speak to it in the document.
So if you're unsuccessful in implementing the sort of mass transit solutions that would allow VMT to come down, they penalize you by taking away the funds that would allow you to implement those.
So it looks like there's public transportation challenges, but then there are also, and I think that again gets back to our whole land use planning, why are people leaving? Why are they driving more than they were 11 years ago? Are they older, and so they're in their cars more because they're not walking places? Are there not the stores, the doctors, the things that they need, so they're leaving? So, I mean, does it get down to that level too? What is in or not in our community that allows people to reduce the level of vehicle transportation? How walkable are we for folks who are, using walkers or a little more mobility challenged? And then also, again, with 2 kids in city areas now, it's all public transportation. They don't own cars. They get on the buses, they get on the trains, and they go. We don't have that, and we're not really built for that. But I mean, I see 2 things there with the reduction. One would be the public transportation, but the other is who is our population, which we've talked about, and it's aging. How are they getting around, and where is it that, or what is it that they're not able to get to here that makes them put more impact on that whole system?
The reality is, though, there's a very strong inverse correlation between VMT and gas prices. The reason there's more VMT right now is that gas is cheap.
I think I'll just drive today because it doesn't cost me that much. Yeah.
Well, that was one of my questions too. Is we're a tourist area, so a lot of the traffic that comes in and out of here is, first of all, not really within our control, other than the fact that if we say we approve a hotel, a new hotel, you would expect that will increase your VMTs. It's something I think all other things equal is a good thing. It's economic development. It brings in TOT and all that stuff.
And
but I'm not sure how you. But I'm not sure. But then of course people will come here for it. So I don't know how you mitigate.
And it's not that you can't approve that project. It's
that you try and make up for it somewhere else.
Won't meet its VMT standard. That is a CEQA issue, which ultimately what it means is you're disclosing that project doesn't meet its VMT standard. That is a significant and unavoidable impact. You can make the finding
that the benefits still exceed the costs.
Of that exceed the cost to approve the project.
Because, I mean, the nature of it is to attract people to come here, and probably they're going to drive.
But it's an important point that you raise, which is ultimately what it means. I think one of the outcomes of SB 743 in a lot of communities is I think you're going to see a lot more EIRs. You'll see projects that otherwise wouldn't have triggered an EIR may trigger an EIR because of the VMT issue.
You have to make the statement of overriding consideration.
That the way to approve the project is to analyze it, find it significant, override it, approve it.
Yeah.
It's putting more steps in the process. And if you think about it in the terms of the goals that they're trying to achieve, it's putting a few more steps in the process. It's putting a few more burdens on that property owner, but it's increasing the public awareness of the issue and the options. Right. Okay. Great. I think then it's 6:35. Maybe we can transition to our discussion on the downtown waterfront plan.
Good.
14, 15, 16. Good. We only have 3 left. Yeah, we'll pick up with number 14 next time. We have 3 left, so I'm pretty confident we could go to our next meeting, have this as the first agenda item, and move to new items after that.
Great, thank you. All right, so not too much of a mental shift, but we are now focusing in from the giant 25-year horizon into the Downtown Waterfront Strategic Plan, which falls under that umbrella. So just a quick recap, when we introduced the project back in July, we talked a little bit about what we were going to achieve with this document. This is a strategic plan that is really has a 5 to 10 year horizon. Our goal is to provide a vision for the downtown and the waterfront area, connect the downtown and waterfront, and that can mean physically, not visually. I've already heard from some of you, and it sounds like the folks that you speak with, that it sounds like it's important to maintain, distinct identities to certain areas, and we can talk about that a little bit more. We'll talk about that at the workshop too, coming up. Develop a unified brand for the area, and by brand here, we're talking about a look and feel of a logo, public signage. We have a lot of signs out there. If you take a look around, and they have a different message. Who are we as Morro Bay? So connecting that and making sure we're presenting a unified brand. Developing design guidelines to enhance the character of the districts, individually perhaps, and identify policies and projects to achieve the vision that we've painted here, and creating a tool for a clear path to implementation. And again, underscoring that 10-year horizon. So some of the ideas, and this is a work in progress, but this is something we've been morphing as we talk to stakeholders and community members. And of course, last July we spoke with, or it's not that long ago, but in July we came to you and talked a little bit about what matters most to you for the downtown and waterfront areas. And here's some of the themes that have kind of emerged. We've heard that the future downtown and waterfront of Morro Bay, downtown and waterfront of Morro Bay, should be proud of its rich fishing industry, history, and celebrate its working waterfront, be a unique, eclectic, charming, and artistic place that stands apart from other seaside communities, be a vibrant and affordable place to live, visit, and work, celebrate memorable views and connections from the downtown to the beach, waterfront, and to Morro Rock, be a place to park your car and walk, trolley, and bike, showcase opportunities to discover and highlight Morro Bay's natural beauty, and support a thriving and robust local economy and tourist industry. So we can talk about that as we go, or we can talk about that now. But this is something we'd like to talk a little bit also at the workshop coming up. So we'd like to kind of see, there's some words in here that we've heard resonate several times, but we realize that until we talk to the greater community in a public workshop about this project, we're going to be collecting more information about what does it mean when we say a tourist industry. Some people feel differently about that, and this is kind of our opportunity as a GPAC to talk through some of these items.
It's a little weird to say that the downtown waterfront will be proud of things. It's like it's not a person.
Be proud of its rich. Yes. Yeah,
you say you could feature it, showcase it, do things like some things like that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that.
It's kind of an emotional thing.
Our waterfront's proud. It's a very proud waterfront.
I appreciate the idea of being able to walk, trolley, and bike everywhere, but we shouldn't overdo that. The reality is that it's a hilly area. Mm-hmm. Okay, we have elderly people, we have people with mobility problems, sure. We have small children. So it's great. It's great for people who are fit and can do it, but there are people who aren't.
Maybe we provide opportunities for that instead. I think that's a great point. Okay.
Have you, in a general statement, have you looked at this in relation to our draft community vision statement to make sure that it's compatible in all the words, that we won't find things that are conflicting statements?
Yeah, this is kind of a little bit more of a drilling down just to specifically the downtown and waterfront from what's already been developed. So we have looked at them side by side, but I think as these morph, we'll need to continue to keep doing that.
I think it would be important to make sure that at the end they both say the same thing.
Yeah. Sure, and there's there will be a pencils down moment of what are our key visions. So we have to stop our moving target at some point. But at this point, this is still very wide open. We're still developing what we're going to be looking at for design guidelines. What are our action items? What are our most important projects? So as we hear a little bit more about those, we'll be updating this kind of accordingly. But I think that's.
Not to get too nitpicky, but this is the central part of the Embarcadero, right? This is like from.
It is. We're not going to the Rock. We are stopping after the working waterfront.
Well, there ain't no beach there.
I don't. I do. I lied. Yeah, here we go. So here's our plan area.
Yeah, I was just saying there's no beach in that area.
There's a little bit.
You got that little.
Oh, down maybe up at the.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It goes up towards the rock.
You have a point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get a little bit of Coleman.
Coleman, yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
That doesn't
So.
really include the whole thing with that.
Yeah. So if there's anything else we can, keep
Can
adding
you go
to
back to that slide, that first slide?
Sure.
I
Glenn and I don't like the word celebrate.
Well, I was exactly, that's what I was going to say. I think
Oh,
these
we
words are a little bit too euphemistic. We just need to have, I mean, what are we going to, how are we going to celebrate? We're going to go out there and we're going to watch the sun go
Have a
down?
party.
Or, I mean,
Woohoo.
you know, it just needs to, the point,
Be
I
more
like
concrete
what you're
than
trying
celebrate.
to get at, but
Sure.
those words just don't seem to work with
Yeah.
Moral Bay.
I know there's other words I guess you could say that are active, like promote or, or somehow.
Or appreciate.
Appreciate,
Or
yeah.
something, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And why are we putting in affordable? Why do we have affordable in there?
Just through what we've heard we needed a variety of housing types, a variety of hotel uses, more options. So when we say affordable place to live, visit, and work, we've heard, we should have a wider spectrum of options. So.
And I can see too, given that this is really, we're talking about a commercial district with the possibilities of, housing upstairs or whatever. But one of the things that I, as a merchant, appreciate is that right now, overall, the downtown is an affordable place for me to have a business, whereas the waterfront would not be. I think it also suggests that we encourage the property owners and any new development to consider that, so that we're not saying, gee, only a Gap could afford to come in here, or only some, big brand name, not that we discourage higher end retail offerings, but, and I think you're right that it sort of emphasizes as a place to live. So probably affordable options for the business, I don't know, but.
I like the idea of a spectrum or a variety. But this almost is saying, let's have a couple more thrift stores on more.
Right, and we got too much of
Okay.
that, way too much of that.
So variety,
Yeah.
some focus more on the spectrum or variety. I think that sounds good.
And the truth of the matter is, we could use some higher end shops in town.
Well, there's some galleries on the waterfront that are.
Yeah, I think
There are, yeah.
That would help
No,
us
there.
capture
Not
that
that we
better.
don't have some higher end shops. We definitely do. But there's a lot of the other as well.
economically diverse place to live, visit,
There you
and
go,
work.
yeah.
I don't know, something like that. We can work with that. That sounds good.
I'm just saying, don't overdo the.
Sure,
the
I know what
affordable.
you're saying. Yes, especially
Why not?
considering we've heard more quality. Some of
Because
these
we do need a variety. We have 4 or 5 thrift stores.
We have a dozen.
But to me, that's almost contained within the overall definition. And I think it's important that we expand the concept to actually say what we mean, that we want there to be affordable opportunities.
We did a study about commercial.
What was the way you replaced it?
We didn't say economically diverse, but or provide a wider spectrum. You're right. If we're trying to say what we mean, what do we mean?
Well, I think a wide spectrum is different from saying affordable. And I think when you say wide spectrum, you mean some high end and some,
Yes.
it means that. So I think
Yeah.
that may be more reflective of what we're talking about.
But to
Well,
me,
I think if we just say what to put it what we mean is we'd like to have affordable commercial rents in some areas, and we'd like to have affordable housing in some areas, and maybe in terms of the per item price of what we're selling, we'd like to go up a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know how to put that succinctly into it.
Well, maybe that's another key vision theme. We've heard, pretty clearly that we are looking for some more quality, whether it be lodging or, we've heard that through the economic studies that had preceded our project too. So maybe there's a missing bullet here for key vision themes. something about.
Just the fact that we're going to be redeveloping the Embarcadero, several of them that are in the pipeline now, is going to drive the prices up more than what they are now and make that less affordable, as Susan was concerned about. But we need to speak to that and be real about it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think.
I like the idea of spectrum, but I don't want to lose the impact of the actual word affordable. So if we can say ranging from affordable to higher end.
That works.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
See, that was my concern about, and I know we're down the road, we can't change this, but putting together downtown and waterfront, to me, just invites these conflicts. Because Embarcadero is like a high-end district. And downtown is more conducive for affordable, as you speak. So I think we're just going to always deal with that conflict as long as we have them together.
But I don't regard that as conflict. I regard that as a range of opportunities.
Range of opportunities.
And I don't think we're talking about homogenizing them. I think we're just talking about trying to get rid of that two-block desert in between the two of them.
With a nail house.
Whatever.
I think range of opportunities is actually a really good way to phrase it too, because it does address the spectrum. It addresses affordability and higher end options. So I think we can work that in there.
Okay.
That's
Your range of opportunities are concentrated in two distinct areas that have distinct markets. They don't overlap very much.
Yeah.
So you have more of your affordable in one place than in the other. I don't know if range is, I guess if you're going to look at downtown and the Embarcadero as a single unit, then there's a range.
within this plan, I suppose. Yeah.
But I guess you can tell I'm resisting conflating those two.
Yeah, actually, and I do want to get to that. I want to talk a little bit about design and look and feel and how different the characters are. And I think that's a big part of our upcoming workshop on October 12th. When we came to you in July, we asked you to help us refine priority areas and give us some ideas for projects. Ultimately, this document is going to seek to provide direction for the next 10 years of some of the low-hanging fruit. What projects should we be focusing on, chipping off, trying to find funding and allocating general fund money towards. So these are some of the, this is the actual exercise you participated in, where you actually had some sticky dots and we said, here's what we heard at our first workshop, help us refine that a little bit. So we're back to do that one last round on October 12th and nail down what are our priority opportunity sites or catalyst sites in this project area. And that can mean public or private projects. What areas need the most improvement and attention? What should we be focusing our time and energy on? And then we also said, thank you for your sticky dot. We'd like you to go around the table and tell us what projects you had in mind when you put it there. So we have this list here that you have helped us develop. And as you can see, especially in the public top improvement, there's a whole lot of ideas that pertain to the Centennial Stairway. So while that is a project, and there was a meeting this week about that, that is definitely something we'll be coordinating with and looking into. But what else? So we're actually, we've developed a workshop opportunity for this upcoming workshop that says, hey, we've heard a lot about these from our staff members, from GPAC, from other projects that have been happening, our economic team that had done some work in the city prior to our project spearheading. So what can you tell us about what your top priorities are? And just cast a broader net of what other ideas are out there, both in the form of projects and actual physical catalyst site or locations.
I guess I'd like to know why we're stopping at going from Morrow or down to the stairway or whatever.
Yeah.
It seems to me like all along Morro Bay Boulevard you have empty lots. You have a really nice city park there, but not much development around the city having anything to do with the park. Like, can you get a snack and go sit over there?
Yeah.
It just seems like I'm not sure why we're drawing that kind of bound. I mean, I understand it's a wasteland or whatever, but I think all along Morro Bay Boulevard are opportunities for doing things where you just have just vacant lots and very, very tiny storefronts.
So outside of this plan area, do you mean? So that
yeah, I mean, if you look at the whole area, goes all the way up.
Yes.
It doesn't stop. It doesn't start in the middle and go just down toward the waterfront. It goes all the way up. And I want to make sure we're not ignoring
Yeah, absolutely.
the upper part of Morro Bay Boulevard also.
I think that's another opportunity. I mean, we're looking to the public, general public now, to kind of weigh in and tell us what areas, if you had, $1 million, where would you focus your energy most? Or if you had 3 sticky dots, where would you be having us focus our opportunities most? So, and we haven't heard that is I mean, we've heard that every time you see a dot appear on this map, this is kind of what we've heard is the priority. So we're looking to the community to tell us a little bit more. Are there other areas that you think are missing from this list? Because this was developed from our last.
Yeah, I mean, you come into the city and you have the traffic circle there, the roundabout, and then it's real spotty until you get a bit further down. And
Yeah,
it just
that's
seems
all
like-
included in the plan area right here.
I know.
Right here. So are you thinking that there's just a lack of dots here and
Well, it's
someone's
just,
missing
there's a lack
something?
of dots there, and just what we've heard was, from Morrow to Maine, or Morrow
Yeah.
down, that Maine to.
Yeah, I heard that earlier in our
And,
conversation too.
I don't think that's the only area we should be paying attention to.
Yeah,
And we're not limiting the conversation to that. It's just where people have commented.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think people are focusing there, and they haven't focused up in that location. It's not to say that they can't or won't.
But
It's
I-
part of the.
I have to second what she's saying because that number one, that park needs a lot of improvement. Okay, it's lost a lot of its big trees, and there's not much focus there except the one little play area. But the other thing that it suffers from is it does not include the entire block. If the city really wants to progress with that, it would need to acquire some of those smaller businesses that are on the the west end and do it. But surrounding that is City Hall, the fire department. It's right across from Albertsons. The library is there. It could become a focal point for the east end of Morro Bay Boulevard with some work and development.
I'm going to give you an example that happened today. Okay, we have an application for in-house right now for redevelopment of a lot that sits adjacent to the post office. That lot could be developed. Okay, that entire block, both sides, there's city facilities on one side and there's commercial on the other side. That entire block is mostly commercial businesses. The lot that's the chiropractic office sits there and came in, and one of the proposal included a new unit, residential unit in the back. We like that.
Yeah, good.
But the potential to get rid of the commercial piece and make that a residential unit. When you looked at the block, I was like, no way. This will not fit into this. This will not fit into this block. It's going to be completely out of place. Looking at this and developing policies related to what we expect to see in these locations is important, because then instead of it's just me saying that, it's the city saying that. Right. And so we are looking to apply the policies that come out of this to that whole area. So we're not ignoring it, because we're going to try to apply them to most of that area there that you see on the screen. And it's something that we need, because it would solve the issue that I had. We had to be very, very tactful to go back to the owner and say, I have a real big concern about this. And thankfully, he's a really nice guy and said, hey, we're happy to sit down and talk to you, and we're going to meet with him in a day or so. But that was just all on me. It wasn't on any policy the city had. The city's policy said, go ahead and put houses there. But that's not what wants to be there. I mean, clearly that would have been about as out of place as you could get with the development proposal. So, I mean, it's just an example of what this will help with. And it's not right down there where all the dots are. It's a block over next to, kind of where by City Hall is.
Well, a lot of people live up in the other area too, and it would be nice to make sure.
I recognize that this is not what the city tasked you to do at this point, and it's really not what the people that are participating in the workshops have in mind. But we're kind of saying, okay, once we get this fixed, where do we go next, kind of thing, in terms of downtown, a longer term.
And it's not that this couldn't tell us to go look at that a little bit more. I mean, it may be that policies we come up here are completely applicable to all those areas. It may be that they're not.
Yeah. How should we be spending our time? I mean, what should we be focusing on next, so we're not sitting idle waiting for our next planning document? This is our action-oriented document while we're realizing the 25-year horizon of our general plan.
And maybe
So-
to come back where we are, maybe that sequence is something that could go into the general plan. In other
Absolutely.
words, now we're doing the waterfront, downtown waterfront specific, and next we're going to move on to the eastern end of Morro Bay Boulevard.
Absolutely.
Or Main Street, I guess.
Yeah.
Are we going to
Morro Bay.
consider incorporating overlays into these areas to identify the different areas like Susan was speaking to as far as the proposed uses and things, so that a developer can come in and with Scott's example, that Scott can, you're in overlay whatever, East Morro Bay commercial overlay, and you hand them that overlay document. It clearly spells out what type of structure, what everything that's allowed to be built there.
As part of our existing conditions kind of analysis from more of an urban design standpoint, we have developed some boundaries that look like they're very logical sub-districts, and we can use those in the zoning code if everybody, once we submit them to the city and they've gone through that process and brought them before you, if we want to create zoning districts out of those or look at the current zoning, and that's kind of how those boundaries were also developed. What is the character of this area? What should the regulations be? How should these be developed? In the zoning code update that.
So that would be the same as language I was using, overlay, it'd be the sub-districts.
Exactly. Yeah,
Same
an
thing.
overlay
Okay.
could be a zoning application, sure, if it's, we need more intensity here, or we need some sensitivity here for these reasons. But really they're sub-districts within this overall plan area. And there's like a civic center district. You can definitely see the character when you look at it from, the street, or when you're standing at the park. There's definitely something different, and you can feel where those boundaries sort of lie, and those could kind of steer what our regulations are in the future. So, yeah. So our next, and this is something we've talked quite a bit about, our next activity at the workshop, or that we did in July after we talked about priority opportunities and projects, were tell us about your design preferences. And this was our team fishing for ideas of what to include in these design guidelines. This is an opportunity to guide future development and make sure that the development community understands what the city is looking for. The city, as in the community, is looking for in new development. So we did this, as you remember, 4 giant Post-its. We like, we dislike, we want waterfront, we want downtown. So these are the answers that you gave us. And so it was really neat for us to kind of look at this and look at the list of items that staff had said they'd like us to focus on when we're developing design guidelines, and continue to flush out that outline. Now we're at a point where we want to take to the October workshop in a couple weeks, a preference survey that says, we'd like to understand and gauge your preferences on themes for, and this has come up a couple times in this meeting, downtown versus waterfront, or downtown and waterfront. Are we combining them? Are we keeping them very separate? We have very key pointed issues, and one of our slides in that workshop presentation will be, tell us, do you like the similar or do you like the different? And what does that look like to you in the future? Through streetscaping furniture, through signage, through architecture. So these are the things that we're going to be asking about. We're going to take people on a virtual tour and talk a little bit about character-defining elements. Maybe not so much architectural styles, but definitely design in general. I've heard a lot about eclectic. We've heard quality materials, artistic colors. We don't want to be homogeneous and be all ecru. We don't want to be an ecru community. We want to be colorful. Is that a funny word? We don't want to be institutional looking. We want to be celebrate our creativity. So those character-defining elements, street and public space furnishings, gateway features, signage, which of these elements resonate with the community? And we'll have a series of imagery from other communities, many from here, saying, what do you like, what do you steer away from? Those both tell us a lot of information about the general preferences. And you can never really find consensus in these sort of exercises, but again, our goal is really to maximize agreement and kind of see where, kind of gauge our preference, the community's preferences. So we'll have a series of slides like you see on the right-hand side with some different imagery. How artistic do we want to be until we aren't taking ourselves seriously enough? What does that really look like? So that's really our goal there. And in the end, I mean, we're looking for ideas, but we'd like a fully fleshed out set of design guidelines that's very topic based. If it's just about lateral access and connectivity, we can focus on that. If it's just really about signage, we can definitely focus on that. It won't be, here's every single thing in the handbook. We want this to be a very focused document that says, here's the particular issues we want to focus on or memorialize in the downtown and waterfront areas. And we'd like you, as you develop or as you approve plans at the counter, to be very mindful of in the future. And these may have a very special home in the waterfront master plan in the future. They can take this entire chapter and stick it in there and it will live on. We are looking at that document now to see what's great and what should be carried forward, what we think should be carried forward based on the discussions we're having with the community. So it's an iterative process. Nothing will get lost and no work has been done in vain. So, yeah, and so with that, the final product here is are the contents of our strategic plan. What does this look like? So the first section would probably be geared more towards existing conditions and what we've talked about as a community, how we got to this destination. We didn't just pull it out of a hat. We had 3 workshops and GPAC discussions and stakeholder discussions and meetings with staff to kind of understand that, what the vision might be, and then we paint out the vision, what we've heard, what it should look like. We'll describe it. We'll show an illustrative of what we think that will look like in the future. Some imagery, some modeling. We have some vision plan narrative that actually says, here's the key projects that we really want to be focusing on and really implementing. And then we'll have a section on design guidelines and branding. What does the brand look like? That we have a consultant on board, Mental Marketing, who's been working with the city to look into branding the community, and they're going to bring some ideas forth to the workshop as well that says, here's some initial thoughts about logo design and colors and what resonates with you as a community. So that'll be another exercise, and that can be implemented through signage, public signage, and that's what we can bring into the design guidelines. And of course, the topic of, we can talk about public improvements that should be consistent in the future, or elements that should be carried out through public improvements, elements that should be carried out through private improvements, branding, how we integrate that into signage perhaps, or maybe our street furnishings, and of course coastal access. And finally, the who, what, when implementation. This is an action plan. We want to be strategic about it. That's why our strategic plan. So in the next 10 years, who's going to be responsible for carrying some of these items out? What are those actions, and when do they need to happen? What priority, and what year, if we want to be that specific? How are we going to get these done? We can even talk about how we're going to fund them. I mean, is this a general plan thing? Is this something we need to start writing a grant for yesterday if it's a first priority? So that's really where the rubber hits the road, and we talk about the who, what, where, when, and why. So that is a lot about the strategic plan, but more importantly, it's a primer for our workshop coming up. So we look forward to seeing you there and participating in those exercises and listening to what the community is saying, because we'd love to come back together at our next GPAC and talk a little bit about that, if, of course, agenda time permits. So we'll do it eventually, if not the next one, the following. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to...
Just a quick comment on that.
Please.
I may be colorblind, but if you're going to be using that color as a presentation, I can't read. I can't read it.
It is. You're right.
Yeah,
it looks great on the screen.
Okay.
On my laptop screen, not here.
Yeah. Didn't play so well.
As far as a role for the workshop, I think because you are all sort of ambassadors of this process, it'd be really interesting for you to really listen at the table at some of these colorful discussions. Let it percolate through your own thought process, because you've all been asked to be part of this committee for a great reason, and bring that perspective and share that when we come back together to talk about where we go with this input and how it shapes our strategic plan document. But I think that's the most important thing. Really, we're asking you for your opinions because you're all respected members of the community, but we're also asking you to be really considerate about the people you talk to every day, the people you're listening to at your working group tables, and kind of share your perspective through your lens of what you think we need to do, and bring that direction and advice forward to us so we can make some decisions about what design guidelines topics we cover and what styles are appropriate. So, yeah.
If there are no further questions for Lorelei on the downtown waterfront, I'll just take a minute and summarize what we believe to be the next steps here. We will continue the process of incorporating the GPAC input on the issues and policies that we have discussed. We have 3 or 4 yet to go that I'm confident we'll be able to polish off in a partial agenda at our next meeting, which means we'll be able to bring forward the next items as well. And our next GPAC meeting is scheduled for Thursday, October 20th. I think at this point I'm not feeling a need for a second meeting based on the progress that we've made tonight on the issues. And then there is the public workshop that Lorelei mentioned on the downtown waterfront strategic plan the previous week on October the 12th. And that is going to be at Vets Hall. Yeah, that's at the Vets Hall. Strongly encourage participation in that workshop as well. And then based on once we've completed the issues, discussion of the issues and policy approaches, we'll then be working with Scott and the rest of the city staff to formulate some staff recommendations that factor in the input from the GPAC for purposes of presenting those key issues and policy topics to the Planning Commission and City Council for further. Essentially, we take your comments and recommendations, we work with staff to prepare a staff recommendation to the Commission and Council, and we walk through those issues with Commission and Council as well, feeding in their input and sort of beginning to dial in specific directions on those policy issues. And that meeting has yet to be determined, and we'll basically get that set once we've finished the remaining 3 or 4 issues. And that concludes our items for this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any additional questions from the commission for our consultants? Any? So we're up to closing comments from committee members. We've kind of been here for a long time, so we're probably all a little speechless at this point. But
I have a couple
comments.
I have a couple, but I'll make it quick. Just to kind of go back over what I heard as a consensus, we have 2 items you're going to bring back that we've tabled as far as consent items. Number 1, do you know when that might be? And number 2, will you notify us? And do you want us to do homework, so to speak, to be able to be versed enough to be able to vote on that, or give our consensus of approval, however you want to word that?
I guess I would encourage the review of the CPA and the CVRA that we discussed at the outset of this meeting. I mean, going ahead and getting into that process.
And those
now.
are in those other documents on the page?
Yeah, on the page it also has the track changes versions of both, so you can see. Okay. So we can see the input that you gave what that looks like in the document. So we can give you that, and we give it to you when there's a clean version of the current thing, and then one with the facelift.
So we do have those 2 items. I anticipate in progression going forward, I think we've got the remaining key issues. Maybe we've got the review of the CBA and the CVRA, and the next item we're going to be prepared to bring forward to you as soon as we can get it to an agenda is review of the existing land use classifications and their alignment with zoning districts. So now we're getting down into
we're
getting
the rubber
closer
hits the
and closer
road.
to the map.
Right.
So that's the next thing that's kind of out in the wings. As soon as we can get through these items.
Would it be possible, Jeff, it would help me to know what you just mentioned, but kind of give us a forecast for the next few months, what's coming next, so that we can be looking to and be kind of in our minds starting to put that together. So if we could give a little notice,
From the general plan and local coastal program side of the project, I think between now and the end of the year, it would be our objective to finish off the key policies, get your concurrence, receive your concurrence on the CBA and CVRA, and get through consideration of land use alternatives.
So I'm asking you to email that to us or something so that we can have something to look at.
Right, and all of those materials are not prepared at this point.
Understand.
A number of them are, but as they are prepared, you will be receiving them.
Understand. It would just a future agendas type of a document that we could look at and say, here's what's coming.
Okay. Yeah, we can work into that.
And you're going to be, Scott, you're going to be looking at notify me to correct that for all of us too.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a little disappointing to find out that wasn't happening.
Any further comments from commission? Scott,
I have nothing. Thanks for all the comments today. You guys did a great job. This was 3 hours. Sometimes we're a little like iffy on how long we can keep you guys here, but you guys did a good job. You stayed with it the whole time. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much.
Help us promote the October 12th workshop to bring your friends, neighbors, and enemies if you like. Anyone is welcome at our workshop.
they may all be the same people. Okay, seeing none, then we will adjourn to our next regularly scheduled GPAC meeting here on October 20th, 2016. And I assume, Scott, our next meeting will be in the Betts Hall?
I'm sorry.
The October 20th meeting will be in the Betts Hall?
Yes.
Okay,
That's a
at
regular schedule.
the Betts Hall at 4 o'clock. Thank you.